This baby is going to be a problem.
Sophia?
Yeah?
Did you take my phone?
No.
Get it out! Get it out!
It's still socially acceptable to shoot a missile in the general direction of somebody you're upset with. You're like, dude, there was like kids over there. This is my favorite response. Well, you know, they're using kids as human shields. It's like, well, you gotta work around that. Jesus Christ, if I'm mad at my neighbor and I want to beat the shit out of him, but he's holding a baby, right? I wouldn't come in and try to punch him through the baby. Yeah, you go in, you know, you throw a hook, you sweep the legs. You do it on the lawn so the baby bounces off the grass, all right? There's fucking rules to this shit.
Name a Drake record right now, a single that can come on the radio right now and work. His music wasn't timeless either. It wasn't timeless, and that's what we didn't realize because he was dropping so much. Everything is not about you. Dog, Wayne ain't said nothing. Nicki ain't said nothing. Baby ain't said nothing. Slim ain't said nothing. Bro, let me tell you something. If I got some shit and nobody around me stuck up for me, I would look at myself more than I would blame the world. Like, damn, what did I do to make these people not? What did I do? You wasn't a good friend. You came around and you talked like us, you acted like us, and you was really some colonizer shit taken from us. And then it was cool because we with you, and then you got into some nigga shit, and now you doing some white man shit. And it's like, now you lost us, and it's just that simple. Let's be clear, when the mood right now ain't for you to be on your high city shit. The mood is for you to speak up for the people who are being ostracized, the communities that are being let down. And you can't even do that because you're too busy in your feelings.
As a whole, I haven't made a record by myself that was even close to the hit that Cream was. So I will leave it right there.
Around me. Cream get the money, dollar dollar bill, yo. Cream get the money, dollar dollar bill, yo. Cash rules everything around me. Cream.
And as far as the best verse ever to come out of that camp,
hold up, man.
That goes to Inspector Deck on Triumph.
I form atomically. Socrates' philosophies and hypotheses. Can't define how I be dropping these mockeries. Lyrically perform armed robbery.
As a collective, they make me great. M-E-T-H-O-D.
Man. M-E-T-H-O-D. Man. M-E-T-H-O-D.
Bernie Sanders joins a bunch of genocidal Zionist Sanders to pass a Lindsey Graham resolution promising to support Israel forever and to destroy Hamas. Bernie Sanders' idea of resisting Donald Trump is joining Senate Republicans so they can support Israel in never-ending war. Another example of how social democracy is just a moderate wing of fascism. Hamas is the legitimate governing body of Gaza, and they have a legal right to engage in armed resistance against Israel, a genocidal apartheid regime that is occupying them. But Bernie Sanders knows this. Bernie Sanders is engaging in pro-genocide propaganda on behalf of Israel. Bernie Sanders wants to convince you that Israeli military action in Gaza is designed to eliminate Hamas instead of the complete extermination of the Palestinian people. This is Bernie Sanders legitimizing genocide, a term that he still refuses to use to describe Israel's military actions. But just to illustrate how much of a Zionist warmonger piece of shit Bernie Sanders actually is, this resolution also calls to defend Israel against Iran and all their proxies that threaten Israel in the region. This is Bernie Sanders giving the international resistance against Zionism a giant middle finger. This is Bernie Sanders legitimizing Israel's invasion of Lebanon, the invasion of the West Bank, the invasion of Syria. This is Bernie Sanders openly endorsing the Greater Israel Plan. Bernie Sanders isn't just a sellout, he is outright evil, and it's time for us to start treating him like the enemy.
It's crazy and evil to support Israel's atrocities because you think God wants you to. The US is so spiritually bankrupt that there are literally tens of millions of Americans who support Israel's genocidal atrocities in Gaza because they think God wants them to. How gross is that? There is a massive, politically engaged demographic in the United States whose idea of an actualized spirituality is demanding that their government keep giving weapons to an apartheid state which is currently raining military explosives onto a giant concentration camp full of children. I'm not primarily talking about Jews here. There are an estimated 30 million Christian Zionists in the United States, which is about twice the total population of Jews in the entire world, Zionist and non-Zionist. That's just members of Christian churches, which are explicitly Zionist as a whole. There are also other Americans who support Israel for religious reasons as individuals. Christian Zionists support modern Israel because they believe its existence will help fulfill a biblical prophecy and bring about the second coming of Jesus, who will take them all to heaven and send all the unbelievers, including Jews, to hell. Together, Christian and Jewish Zionists in the United States comprise an extremely powerful voting bloc who aggressively push Washington to support Israel and its various mass atrocities throughout the years, continuing with what we are seeing in Gaza today, because their religion tells them it's what God wants. Which just gets more pathetic the more you think about it. I mean, even if I believed in all that stuff, and even if actual biblical God came up to me himself and told me to help kill tens of thousands of children, I personally would tell Yahweh to go suck a dick. Go kill 20,000 Palestinian kids, God would say. How about you go suck a dick? I would reply. No deity who would make such a demand is one who is worthy of being worshipped and obeyed. Clearly the student has surpassed the teacher, Jehovah, and we humans are now more ethical than you are. We therefore have no further use for you or your guidance. Away with you, O Lord, and good luck with that whole dick-sucking thing. Not even the most notorious cult leaders in modern times could convince people that it's good and fine to murder tens of thousands of children. Jim Jones himself could not manipulate people into accepting such a thing. But get some weird-looking evangelical thumping a Bible in front of a podium, and suddenly people are praying that God guide American missiles onto every hospital in Gaza. It's generally considered impolite to tell people they should change their religious beliefs. But if your religion tells you to help murder tens of thousands of children in a genocidal onslaught, you should change your religious beliefs. You should leave your current religion, because it's evil and it's making you evil. Apart from how evil it is, it's also amazingly vapid. It's like, really? That's as deep as your religious fervor goes? Political support for a Western settler colonialist project full of Europeans speaking an artificially resurrected language so they can pretend to be native Middle Easterners? Demanding US military expansionism throughout a crucial geostrategic region because of some uninspiring prose written by long-dead men? Pitiful. Spirituality, at the very least, is supposed to make us better people. Ideally, it calls us beyond ourselves and gets us questioning whether life is as it appears, encouraging us to explore the possibility of a direct confrontation with something vast and mysterious within ourselves. Best case scenario, it leads to the shedding of ego and a deep and lasting inner peace. Religious Zionism is in the exact opposite direction of all this. It makes people worse. It encourages the most horrific things happening in our world today. It nails the mind to a pernicious worldview that is held together by non-stop lies and manipulation. It drags human consciousness downward. It says so much about how spiritually shallow and sick Western civilization is that such belief systems have become so prevalent and influential. The human heart longs for more. Something beckons to us from the stillness, begging us to explore the deeper waters of our being.
Homegrown genetics. Yeah, you got that? So, American citizens, that's what they mean when they say homegrown genetics. We gotta build a bigger jail. So this is Trump, our terrorist president, meeting with his little bitch foot soldier, Bukele, who is the president of El Salvador, who is facilitating all of this, just saying that they're going to defy the Supreme Court order, saying that they do have to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to the United States, who is a green card holder here. These liars admitted it was an administrative error while also claiming he was in a gang. Mr. Garcia was found to have been wrongfully removed in part because the U.S. immigration judge had granted him legal protection from deportation in 2019. His family, including his wife Jennifer Vasquez, is a U.S. citizen. They admitted it was a mistake, and then the court ordered that he needs to be brought back, and now they're laughing here like it's fucking cute, talking about how they're not going to bring him back, and in fact, they're going to start sending homegrown terrorists to this El Salvadorian prison, which again is unconstitutional. You can't just fucking send an American citizen to a different fucking country. But of course, this guy was never convicted of terrorism either. But you idiots that are defending this think that this isn't going to come for you too. They're literally telling you it is. They're literally telling you it is. This is what authoritarianism looks like. And my question is, why should we have to listen to the courts when they don't? Because if the Supreme Court makes a ruling and they say fuck you, well, why do we have to listen to the Supreme Court then? Why do we have to pay our taxes? If our government is not keeping up their end of the bargain when it comes to, I thought that was a bug that scared me. If our government doesn't have to keep up their end of the bargain when it comes to the social contract or the laws, why are American citizens required to do so?
But if you do see a man who knows where he stands, who knows his place in the world, then you ought to assume that he went through a whole process to get to that point. I mean, you'll hardly ever see a man, an older man anyway, who's upright, except that he's someone who has survived his own sins and the consequences of his sins. When you see that old uncle at the front row of the masjid who's always there for the salah, at the front saf, well, he probably knows more about the devil than you know about your own self. Every old righteous man is a combat veteran. I mean, like almost any man my age. Me, myself, I've been all sorts of bad in my life, and I've been good too. Depending on who you are and when you knew me, you might love me or you might hate me, and you'd both be justified. Because I've been all sorts of things. But now more than anything else, what I am is experienced. And for me personally, I just want to avoid the stupidity of evil as much as possible, except to point it out when I see it. You know, I get compliments in my comment section. I get praise in my comment section. And I also get a lot of criticism and I get a lot of insults. But I'm impervious to any of those, to both things. Because I know who I am. I know that I'm not as good as anyone thinks I am, and I know that I'm not as bad as anyone thinks I am. But after a decent amount of life experience, you collect a lot of information about both good and evil. And with that information, the least you can do is become a snitch on the devil. You know, just like those mafia guys who cooperate with the feds, who cooperate with the authorities and give them all the inside information about how the mob operates. We understand evil, and we came by that knowledge through experience. See, once you realize the disaster of being evil, not the glamour of it, not the superficial momentary perks, not the rush, but the actual spiritual catastrophe that it is and what it does to your life, well, then you begin to grasp and to appreciate what it means to be good. Not because you became a saint, but because you saw hell peek through your life, the cracks in your life, and you didn't want to fall all the way in. Being good isn't always about noble intentions and having a pure heart. That's the truth. Sometimes being good is just about pure survival. It's about not wanting your life to be a disaster. It's about being sick of the pain that you've caused others and the pain that you've carried within yourself. You don't necessarily always turn to goodness because you think that you're better than others. You turn to goodness because you know you're not better than others. Because you remember all too well what it's like to be at your worst.
A young Chinese influencer on TikTok who speaks English has made a fascinating clip directed at the American people. And the first time I saw it, I said to Chris, we gotta play this for Professor Meerschaum. We gotta have his comments on it. So it's a minute and a half long, but it's in English and it's fascinating. And I want to discuss it with you after we watch it together. Chris, cut number 20.
They rob you blind and you thank them for it. That's a tragedy. That's a scam. That's why I'm saying this right now. Americans, you don't need a tariff. You need a revolution. For decades, your government and oligarchs who ship your job to China, not for diplomacy, not for peace, but to exploit cheap labors. And in the process, they hollowed out your middle class, crushed your working class, and taught you to be proud while they sold your future for profit. And yes, China made money, but we used it to build roads, lift millions out of poverty, fund healthcare, raise living standard. We reinvested in our people. My family also benefited from it. What did your oligarchs do? They bought yachts, private jets, mansions with golf course driveways. They manipulate the market, dodge tax, and pour billions into endless wars. And you get stagnated wages, crippling healthcare costs, cheap dopamine, debt, and flag wave property made in China while they pick your pocket. For 40 years, both China and the United States benefit from the trade, the manufacturing, but only one of us use that wealth to build. This isn't China's fault. This is yours. You let this happen. You let the oligarchs feed you lies while they made you fat, poor, and addicted. Now they blame China for mess they made. I don't think so. I don't think you need another terror. You need to wake up. You need to take your country back. I think you need a revolution.
The one correction I would make, I realize a lot of this is ideological, is we haven't spent billions on useless wars. We've spent trillions on useless wars. But take it from there, Professor Mearsheimer.
Well, if you listen,
That young man were your student in your class and he stood up and gave that minute-and-a-half statement, how would you respond?
I would tell him I basically agree with him. I think he's correct. And I think, by the way, that this is a message in large part that Trump made as a candidate before the 2016, 2020, and the 2024 election. And it's what helped get him elected in two of those three cases. I think there are a huge number of people in this country who feel exactly the way that Chinese gentleman feels about what has happened.
Israel's backers keep whining that they're losing control of the narrative. Amnesty International is now calling Israel's mass atrocity in Gaza a live-streamed genocide due to the way this nightmare is unfolding right in front of us on the screens of our devices around the world, and public support for Israel is plummeting in the United States. Zionists are losing control of the narrative, and they know it. They are not taking it well. During a speech at a summit hosted by the Jewish News Syndicate earlier this week, former U.S. Senator Norm Coleman said that Jews are the masters of the universe and should use their power in Silicon Valley to control online information in order to win a digital war. Coleman, who is Jewish, made the following remarks on Monday, quote, "A majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel, and my friends, I think the reason for that is we're losing the digital war. They're getting their information from TikTok, and we're losing that war. And when you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews. We've got Altman at OpenAI. We've got Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. We've got Google founder Sergey Brin. We've got a group across the board. Jan Koum, founded WhatsApp. It's us. And we have to figure out a way to win the digital battle. We've got to get our digital sneakers on so that the truth can prevail over the lies. And when we do that, the future of Israel will be stronger because a majority of all Americans will support Israel. We'll make that happen. We have to make it happen." End quote. Now, if any anti-Zionist with a public profile had said Jews control Silicon Valley and use it to influence public opinion for the benefit of Israel, they'd be forcefully denounced by the entire Western political media class as a rabid anti-Semite. But a Jewish politician saying Jews must use their control over Silicon Valley to influence public opinion about Israel receives no attention from that same political media class. Interestingly, at that same event, Meta's Jewish diaspora chief, Jordana Cutler, noted that Meta platforms like Facebook and Instagram, quote, banned content claiming Zionists run the world or control the media. Under Cutler's own guidelines, the prior comments from her fellow attendee would have been banned if he'd said them on Facebook instead of at the Jewish News Syndicate International Policy Summit. Israel's backers have been whining about losing control of the narrative for months. In February, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham told the press at an event in Tel Aviv that in the Arab world, Israel has won the war on the ground, but they've lost it on television, lamenting that all they see is morning, noon, and night attacks on the Palestinian people. The Arab world is seeing attacks on the Palestinian people morning, noon, and night because that's what's happening. That is what the entire world is seeing. In a talk at the McCain Institute last year, then Senator Mitt Romney told then Secretary of State Antony Blinken that Congress supports banning TikTok because it shares information that turns people's opinions against Israel, saying such information has a very, very challenging effect on the narrative. The real game is the next generation. And Hamas and their accomplices, the useful idiots in the West, are falling in line in ways that are terrifying. End quote. Israel's backers are losing control of the narrative because there's only so much that PR spin can do to convince people they're not seeing what's right in front of their eyes. If you're strangling someone right in front of me, there are no words you can say to me to convince me I'm not seeing someone being strangled, no matter how skillful you are at manipulation. Actions speak louder than words. Talk is cheap. A picture is worth 1,000 words. These aphorisms exist for a reason. Past a certain point, there is only so much that mountains of verbiage can accomplish when people are seeing history's first live-streamed genocide playing out right before their eyes. Whoever controls the narrative controls the world. The average human life is dominated by mental stories. So if you can control the stories they are telling about what's going on, you can control the humans. Losing narrative control is losing real power. That's why Israel's supporters are growing increasingly anxious.
Free argued that she lost a, quote, fatally flawed election that violated the DNC charter and discriminated against 3 women of color candidates and asked for 2 new vice chair elections. In February, after several rounds of voting, the race came down to 5 candidates: Kenyatta, Hogg, Free, and 2 other women. Kenyatta and Hogg claimed the open spots. Quote, by aggregating votes across ballots and failing to distinguish between gender categories in a meaningful way, the DNC's process violated its own charter and bylaws, undermining both fairness and gender diversity, argued Free, a citizen of the Choctaw Nation. She also had this to say.
Put a chick in it, make her gay.
Yeah. That got a rousing ovation at the DNC. Free filed her challenge on February 28th, and committee members were informed yesterday that it would be taken up on May 12th. Attorneys for Hogg argued in a response to the committee earlier this month that the election, quote, was conducted in compliance with the rules in place at the time, and that it is inappropriate to try to revise those rules or decisions after the fact through a credentials challenge. An upcoming vote to require neutrality from DNC members wasn't actually about Hogg. According to DNC Chair Ken Martin, the purpose was restoring the trust of Democratic voters after anger at the superdelegate system that helped nominate Hillary Clinton in 2016 and facilitate the party's early endorsement of Joe Biden ahead of the 2024 primary. But some DNC members have spoken out against Hogg's PAC, and he leaned into the media coverage, conflict equals news, to do hours of interviews about the need to change the party. He told me last week that he would not quit the DNC if asked to, and that the party would have to force him out. All right, so the rules that she's talking about Let's see what those rules are.
The order of balloting is designed to ensure equal access to the ballot, regardless of gender identity. As we must elect a candidate of any gender as well as one male and one female vice chair, we will first ask members to elect a candidate of any gender on the first ballot. Any candidate, male, female, and non-binary, can be elected on that ballot. After a candidate is elected on the first ballot, we'll have one officer of the three. So then we will know which position is filled of the one male, one female, and one vice chair of any gender. Our second ballot would also be for a candidate of any gender. Then our third ballot will be the third position that is remaining based on the two results. Either a male candidate if a candidate that is not male has not been elected, or a female candidate if a female has not been elected.
A trans with a Schmendrick swinging it in a girl's bathroom. It's perversion. It's sick. It's degenerate and sick.
It couldn't be more clear. It couldn't be more clear. I don't understand how this clear violation of those incredibly clear rules were violated. So just to finish up, changing the endorsement rule at an August meeting wouldn't have automatically done that, meaning push Hogg out. But if the party agrees with Free and grants the relief she wants, it would hold new elections for vice chair, giving anti-Hogg members a chance to get rid of him. I'm saying that they're going to line up behind this challenge just to push him out, but it is going to wind up just bringing people's attention back to the freak show that was the DNC chair race, and it's completely deranged, impossible to understand, non-binary chart.
Yeah, no, they don't care about anything except seniority and loyalty to the leadership. That's all they care about. They don't care about winning. It doesn't matter to them that he's only doing this in safe districts. That doesn't matter. It is a career ladder. That's all the party is. It's really not a legitimate party. That's how a guy like Hakeem Jeffries, with no charisma, no talent, no vision, no platform, no leadership ability, no nothing, that's how he got to be the top-ranking Democrat, because he takes a lot of Israel money. He raises a lot of money because he's in a center of capital, New York.
Yep, a lot of real estate money.
Yeah, a lot of real estate money. He backed Hillary Clinton very, very strongly in 2016. And so he is where he is. Despite the fact that he has absolutely no talent whatsoever. That means nothing to them. It means absolutely nothing to them. How good you are, what a leader you are, whether you can win or lose.
The alphabet game.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And the alphabet game, yeah, they like that. I mean, that was a little cherry on top for them. But yeah, that's how a guy like that rises in the ranks. For Hogg saying, hey, I'm only doing this in safe seats, doesn't matter. Democrats think that getting elected to a safe seat gives you permission to do nothing, right? That's the whole point of running as a Democrat in a safe seat. You win, you get to be Jerry Nadler for however long he's been in Congress. You don't have to do anything. You're there, you can't lose. You can't lose to a Republican because there aren't enough Republicans in your district. And you can't get primaried because the party protects you. It's very much a mafia in that way. The party will protect you, so you don't have to do anything. And so, for Hogg to think it makes a difference, or to think that, people are going to give him a pass because he's only doing this in safe districts, he's misunderstanding the purpose of the party and what the party is fundamentally. It's really not a political party.
Right.
It is a business. It is a career space. That's essentially what it is. And that's how it functions, no matter what. Now, in terms of the actual gaming out of this, it's a question of, do the Republicans blow it bad enough where the Democrats can win being like this? And I think at this rate, they will. At this rate, unless things turn around, I think the Republicans are going to be so unpopular by the time the midterms roll around. Democrats probably will win doing nothing. That's another real tragedy of this, is that these people just fuck this up so bad that what you're probably getting back is another incarnation of the same neoliberal establishment that inevitably backslides back into this.
Yeah, they haven't done any soul searching. They have no new ideas. And if you look at David Hogg, he's just a next generation shitlip. He's just a shit lib that wants a younger generation like himself in charge of the DNC, which, he's not wrong. I mean, obviously, the Democratic leadership is geriatric to dead. You need to cultivate a bench. You need to start to bring some younger people in. But he doesn't represent any meaningful ideological shift, ideological change.
Nope.
This is a fight about who holds power within the organization. You don't hear a word about him questioning the underlying political beliefs of the DNC itself or the party as a whole. It's just a struggle for generational power that he's trying to spearhead. But even on that, you have to be a sweet summer child to think these people give a shit. Do they look like they give a shit? Do they act like they give a shit? Even the fact that they wound up with that piece, that slice of Melba toast as the DNC chair after parading the binary non-Latino and the black woman who needs to be heard, the fact that they wound up with that should tell you what you need to know. Even on the narrow identitarian issues that they claim to champion, they don't give a shit about that either.
Right.
It's all about money, power, and career advancement, which he's finding out to his sadness, I think.
Please clap. We don't know Russia's motives. That's often the case. And it doesn't even make sense to say Russia's motives. We don't know the motives of the key leaders that will be making key decisions, especially President Putin. Does President Putin want to take over Ukraine, as many in the United States believe? Does President Putin want to reconstruct the Russian Empire, as many people in the U.S. believe? Or what President Putin says is that Russia does not want the U.S. military alliance, NATO, to expand into Ukraine. Well, we can't be sure what the underlying motivations are, but we should think about what is being said by the other side. And what Putin is saying is, we don't want a military alliance of the United States on our border. That is a national security threat to us, they say. And I think in that context, it's always useful to think empathetically and to ask the question, well, how would we see a comparable situation? We don't have to look hard because we had a comparable situation. Cuba under Castro wanted and made a military alliance with the Soviet Union in 1960. And the United States said, okay, we'll invade. We didn't say, well, that's Cuba's right. No problem. Every country gets to choose its own military alliance, so all power to them. We said, okay, we will launch a CIA-led invasion at the Bay of Pigs. It worked out very badly, as everybody recalls, and in 1962, it led step by blundering step to the Cuban Missile Crisis and near global annihilation in nuclear war. So we went through that experience. We didn't want on our border a foreign superpower. And think about it today. Suppose that the government of Mexico said one day, you know, we're a sovereign country. We have a right to choose our own military alliance, and we really want an alliance with the People's Republic of China. Washington would not step back and say, okay, they're sovereign. That's okay. No problem. We respect that. But that's what we're saying that Russia should accept. We're saying that it's a principle, not just a fact, but a principle, that Ukraine should have the choice to choose its own military alliance. That's supposedly a moral right. So Putin says, no, I will take action if that happens. As I said, we don't know Putin's underlying motivation, but I believe that the right answer to this question, at least from our game theoretic response right now, would be to say, you stay out of Ukraine, but we understand that NATO in Ukraine is viewed as a real provocation. And so we will exercise restraint on our side also, so that NATO won't expand to Ukraine. We won't claim that it has the right, because it doesn't. But also, you will not take a step foot inside Ukraine. And to my mind, whether that would work as a peace measure or not, it's not appeasement. It's perfectly sensible. It views the situation from the other party's side as well, which is that they don't want the United States military on their border. And I don't blame them, just as we wouldn't like it in the other direction. So all of this is to say that in any relationship of statecraft, it's important not to assume the worst of your counterpart. That guarantees war, by the way. But rather to understand, and even more important, to negotiate.
This removal of missiles, both from Cuba and from Turkey. The big mistake Kennedy made, and I always think it's unfair to call it a mistake because he saved the world, so you get a lot of credit for that. But the mistake he made was insisting that the deal be secret, so that it looked to the American people like he had simply faced down the Soviet Union and they had backed away because it wasn't known that the removal of the American missiles were part of an exchange, and that wasn't known for decades, actually. Well, just to come to the book.
Let me just stop you there, because right in the preface, and I didn't know this, you talk about once that machinery begins to be put in place, a human error can trigger a nuclear catastrophe. You write one Alaska-based U.S. Air Force pilot had not gotten the message. This was not to send flights over Cuba. And after taking off to collect air samples to check on Soviet nuclear testing, the pilot had become disoriented and inadvertently flown his plane into Soviet airspace. Soviet fighter jets scrambled to intercept the U-2, while due to the high alert status prompted by the crisis, the U.S. planes sent to escort it back to base were armed with nuclear warheads and had the authority to fire.
Yes, and actually, that was one of the episodes that brought us to the brink of nuclear annihilation, but there was one even more dramatic, which was that after the agreement was reached between Kennedy and Khrushchev, there was a disabled submarine in the Caribbean that was part of a squadron, and it was the one in that squadron that carried nuclear-tipped torpedoes. And when that disabled sub rose, normally the U.S. might drop depth charges on the submarine to get it, to force it to rise. But a jackass, I think is the right technical term, dropped live hand grenades as he was flying over this rising submarine. And the skipper thought, our sub is under attack. There must be a war.
This was a Russian submarine.
Russian submarine. That was my point. Disabled Russian submarine, excuse me. And they thought they were under attack and that there must be a war at the surface. It was disabled and out of communication. And so the captain of the vessel ordered that the nuclear-tipped submarine be loaded into the torpedo bay and that it be fired. And if it had been fired under U.S. nuclear doctrine, being attacked by a nuclear weapon, including a nuclear-tipped torpedo, under U.S. doctrine would have launched that full-scale response that would have destroyed humanity. And the order to fire was countermanded at the last moment by virtue of the fact that there happened to be a Soviet party official who was senior to the captain of the vessel, who said, I don't think it's a good idea. We should rise without firing. And they did. And it turned out there wasn't a war on the surface, and there wasn't a need to launch the torpedo. We came within a second of ending the world. And that was after the agreement had been reached between the USSR and the United States. And Martin Sherwin, the late historian who now people know as the person who co-wrote the great book American Prometheus on J. Robert Oppenheimer, wrote this story in his wonderful last book before he passed away, Gambling with Armageddon, which is a history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Absolutely phenomenal.
As is American Prometheus.
And yes.
They're both great books. He wrote that with Kai Bird, of course. You can visit that submarine. I think it's in San Francisco. I did the Russian submarine a museum. So Kennedy walks away from this horrified at how close the world came to nuclear Armageddon, but he also walked away with a deep distrust of the military. And I want to talk about the decision to give this speech, which I had not read in full until I read it in your book, and then went and listened to it. It has to be one of the most courageous acts by a politician, you could argue perhaps since anything FDR did. And it's utterly remarkable. And what's frightening or disturbing is that I can't see any political figure giving a speech like that again. So let's talk about how Kennedy changed and what he set out to do. And of course, it was all cut short by his assassination in November of 1963.
I think first it's fair to say that being president of the United States is a tough job, and it's impossible to do right in the early days and early years because you don't get it. And our security state in the United States, which was created by the National Security Act of 1947, which created a secret security state and a private army of the United States called the CIA, which is one half its function because it does intelligence and it does private warfare of the United States. And the whole apparatus is secret and largely out of control. And it is absolutely out of control by any public understanding or scrutiny or accountability or congressional oversight today as it was in the early 1960s. Well, Kennedy came in with a lot of energy and idealism and brilliance, and he stumbled terribly in the first year with the Bay of Pigs, Cuban invasion, and then in the second year, the near disaster of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And my view is he had the potential for greatness at the beginning, and by his third year, he had become a magnificent politician and statesman of the first order, one of our truly great presidents. Not so much in the first 2 years, although the potential was there, but the growth that came through this set of trials was extraordinary. Already after the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy was so disturbed by the CIA that he was beside himself about how they had led the U.S. and his administration and himself personally into this awful debacle. He didn't trust the CIA. After the Cuban Missile Crisis and after hearing people like Curtis LeMay even essentially calling Kennedy a traitor for not launching the war or a coward, and feeling all of this pressure for war, he was profoundly disturbed and profoundly moved and profoundly scared at how fragile the world was. And he was determined to do something in 1963. And he
Let me just interject. He fired Dulles and he fired Bissell. So he actually took on the CIA establishment and triggered deep animus. And I want you, as you go on, to talk about this speech. But one of the things I found fascinating from your book is how few people he informed about what it was he was about to say. And so I want to make sure we talk about the content of what he said.
So Kennedy wanted to say to the American people, peace is possible, even with the Soviet Union, even with the other side. And the whole content of the speech is they are human beings like we are. They want to live. They want to protect their children. They want to have a future. And this speech is unbelievable because it's the only foreign policy speech I know of anywhere where it is not telling the other side what to do, not making threats, not reveling in glory, not saying we are number one, not saying they are evil, but saying to the American people, we need to reconsider our own position. And remember, today we're told every day by the completely irresponsible, reckless, and ignorant mass media like the New York Times, I'm going to say, because it's terrible, and like the Washington Post and others, there's no one to talk to. There's no one to negotiate with over Ukraine. And in the Cold War in 1963, it was even more like that. The Cuban Missile Crisis had just occurred. Could you even imagine negotiating with the Soviet Union? And Kennedy's whole message is, we can negotiate. They want the same things. They too will abide by treaties as long as those treaties are also in their interest. And they can be relied upon to abide by treaties that are in their interest and also in our interest. There is a benefit of cooperation. This is rational. In fact, the pursuit of peace is the rational end of rational men, says President Kennedy.
I just want to read a couple sections because it is an absolutely remarkable, and as you point out, Bruce Sorensen beautifully elegiac and just gorgeously written. But these are some of the things. I just want to read 3 short sections. I speak of peace, this is Kennedy, as the necessary rational end of rational men. I realize that the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuer fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. And then he says, so let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. And just to conclude, he asks in the speech, what kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living. The kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. That was incredible.
It gives you goosebumps. Of course, I've listened, I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of times to the speech. I've made my family listen on so many occasions. But the words are thrilling. The words are mesmerizing in their beauty, and Ted Sorensen has a big hand in that as well, and in their ability to make change. And I think one of the things that Kennedy also says in here, which is incredible, is his advice on leadership. And I don't have exactly the words here, but to paraphrase, he says, by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. So the goal of peace, if made to be manageable, practical, like a treaty, to stop atomic testing stop atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons, is a practical, manageable step, and people draw hope from it. So the speech was so riveting and powerful. By the way, kept completely outside of the bureaucracy. It was essentially hidden from the security apparatus, from the State Department, the CIA, even the White House. Only Sorensen and Kennedy worked on it basically until the last moment. Then they said, I'm giving this. Kennedy said, I'm giving it. So it could not be vetoed by state or by the Defense Department or the National Security Council or anybody else. And he gave it. And what is amazing, absolutely amazing, is that Khrushchev heard it, was carried away, summoned the U.S. envoy, Kennedy's envoy, to Moscow, Averell Harriman, and said, this is the finest speech by an American president since FDR. I want to make peace with your president. The words were so powerful. The motivation, the ideas were so powerful. Kennedy disseminated the speech through Pravda Izvestia online.
Isn't that hilarious? Pravda reprinted it.
Exactly, and broadcast the speech. And within a few weeks, they had signed the agreement. Within a few weeks. Absolutely an astounding achievement. Then Kennedy, just to say, he was also the grassroots politician. He was a political guy to the core. He went out to campaign for it. And so he took his tour around the United States. The Joint Chiefs, oh, well, we don't know. They come to testify in Congress and try to knock down this agreement. And Kennedy carried the American public overwhelmingly, and then won a decisive victory in the Senate 60 years ago, just now, for the ratification of this treaty. And this is the time when we're talking is the time of the UN General Assembly. Kennedy went to tell the leaders what this meant in another completely magnificent address. And he said, this is not the end of conflict, but it is a ray of hope piercing through the clouds. And he ends his address to the world leaders assembled in front of him in the chamber of the UN General Assembly. Kennedy, having brought peace, brought hope, and all the world leaders assembled in front of him. And he says to them that Archimedes is said to have told his friends, give me a place to stand and I can move the world. Fellow leaders of the world, let us see if we can take our stand here in this place, in this time, to move the world towards peace. And you just can't get better than that. The idealism, the hope, the practicality, and Kennedy infused the whole world with it. And then they killed him.
And we've lost it. We've lost it.
And they killed him because I'm personally convinced, after having studied this in depth for decades now, and now we have the report completely debunking the Warren Commission with the magic bullet being no magic bullet at all, but a bullet that the Secret Service pulled out of the back of Kennedy's seat and put on the stretcher, debunking the entire forensic basis of the Warren Commission. I'm pretty convinced that it was rogue elements within the U.S. government itself.
Oh, Alan Dulles.
Alan Dulles, CIA.
Can't get more evil than that.
Exactly. We don't know exactly who, but this was a conspiracy, and it was a conspiracy against peace. And it's our security state is in full force. Our president, in my view, is not in control. And in any event, has been a hardliner and a Cold Warrior, whatever you want to call it, well past the Cold War. These neocons don't understand peace. They don't understand negotiation. They don't understand diplomacy. They don't understand the nuclear threat. And one other point, Chris, of the speech that I think is so pertinent and completely neglected, Kennedy says, above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. And the U.S. has gone out to humiliate Putin and to defeat Putin. And Russia has 6,000 nuclear weapons. What are we doing? What are we thinking? Of course, I take it a little bit, even a step back. I think this is, I call it the war of NATO enlargement, because I think the entire war in Ukraine came because the United States so recklessly and imprudently kept pushing NATO enlargement. Russia saying, stop, it's a red line, stop. And then, not to Ukraine, for heaven's sake, not to Ukraine, our 2,300-kilometer border, not to surround us in the Black Sea. And the U.S. is deaf to this. And then trying to humiliate Putin and doing exactly the opposite of what Kennedy said. And I take it seriously when Kennedy says in that remark about not pushing a nuclear power to a corner, he says, above all, as if that's the synthesis of what he's learned from the Cuban Missile Crisis. Above all, don't humiliate a nuclear adversary. And our people don't even know it. We don't have diplomats, and we don't have a president, in my view, that understands the job of keeping the foot on the brake. So it's a very dangerous time.
In this last part, I want to ask you what happened. So you have this incredible moment in American history. Of course, Khrushchev doesn't last much longer. After Kennedy's assassination, the hardliners regain control in the Soviet Union. What happened? Just run through that historical period to where we are now.
Of course, it's complicated, but there was a period of détente and of arms agreements. The Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which we've been discussing, led directly to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty a few years later, a really momentous achievement to not stop nuclear proliferation, but definitely to slow it down dramatically, because Kennedy rightly worried about 30 or 40 nuclear-powered or nuclear weapons countries by the time we are now, and it is around 10, absolutely not safe and in control, but not the mass proliferation. And the Treaty of 1963 played a critical part in that. Détente came. We had our ups and downs. We had huge tensions in the early 1980s when Reagan proposed to put intermediate range nuclear weapons into Europe, and the Cold War intensified, heated up again. Then came Gorbachev, and Gorbachev was a great statesman, the greatest of our age of that time, a man of peace. And he and Reagan actually realized the potential for peace and negotiated an end to the Cold War. And quite remarkably, it was Gorbachev who unilaterally said in 1990, I will disband the Warsaw Pact military alliance of the Soviet Union. And James Baker III, the Secretary of State of George Bush Sr., who had followed Reagan as president, of course, Baker ran to assure him, we will never take advantage of your decision, President Gorbachev. We will not move NATO 1 inch eastward. And this was repeated by the German government that was interested in German reunification. And Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the foreign minister of Germany, promised no NATO enlargement. Of course, as soon as the Soviet Union ended at the end of 1991, the U.S. cheated. And it cheated till this day. And despite vast documentary evidence, we have a lot of people, oh, we never promised anything. It's true, Gorbachev didn't get it in writing in a treaty because they weren't making treaties. They were arranging the end of the Cold War. But Gorbachev was promised, and those promises were sheer lies.
I just want to interject. I was there. I covered the unification of Germany. I covered the East German Revolution in Czechoslovakia and Romania. And they could not have unified Germany without Soviet acquiescence.
Of course. And Gorbachev said, this is important for us. You not take advantage of us. It was very, very clear. And I was there as an economic advisor to Gorbachev's team, and then to President Yeltsin's team, and to President Kuchma's team of Ukraine. I saw these events also very, very close up. And we had a chance for peace. And the United States said, well, it's not peace we want unipolarity. We want world hegemony. We're now the most powerful country in the world. We won, you lost. We're going to even take out every ally you ever had, whether it's Syria or Iraq or Libya or Serbia or others. We're going to go in one by one and clean up the act because we can do it with impunity now. Who are you? You're a defeated power. And so the United States treated Russia with contempt, engaged in regime change operations all over the region, usually with some mix of CIA background and National Endowment for Democracy and NGOs pouring in money and mucking up the local politics to get someone that would be compliant with the United States. And Russia kept saying, wait a minute, you promised? And you keep moving eastward towards us. Clinton started the process of NATO enlargement. His own Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry, was aghast and thought about resigning, said this is going to mess up everything. Of course, the very architect of containment policy, George Kennan, who invented containment in 1947 in his long telegram and in his Foreign Affairs article, said, you start NATO enlargement, you're going to have absolutely a new Cold War. But American politicians cannot hear anybody's concerns, and the arrogance is breathtaking, and the ignorance is breathtaking in my view, and the power of the military-industrial security state in the United States is awful and breathtaking as well. So under Clinton, 3 countries joined NATO, and then under Bush Jr., 2007, 7 more countries, the 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Slovenia. And Russia's now being cornered by the advancing NATO. And Putin says in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, stop. You promised in 1990 no advance. And now all you're doing is advancing your military. And in 2002, by the way, the United States unilaterally pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and started to put in Aegis missiles on Russia's borders, nearby Russia, in Poland and Romania in particular. So Putin says, stop this. And what does the United States do in response? Bush Jr. instructs his ambassador to NATO, interestingly, Victoria Nuland, who was Cheney's foreign policy advisor, then U.S. ambassador to NATO, then suddenly is Hillary's foreign policy advisor, then suddenly the assistant secretary of state in 2014 when the U.S. was part of the overthrow of the Ukraine government to get someone that was a suppliant to the U.S. desire for NATO enlargement. And so the tensions kept rising until 2014, the United States participated in a regime change operation, very typical, overthrowing a Ukrainian president that wanted neutrality, Viktor Yanukovych. And at that moment, Putin said, you're not getting our naval base in Crimea, and took back Crimea because it was not going to fall into NATO hands. And the Russian part of Ukraine, ethnic Russian part of the eastern Donbass, was aghast at the Russophobic regime that had come into power with the U.S. connivance in February 2014. So it called to break away, and it required a treaty, 2 treaties, in fact, Minsk I and Minsk II, to try to make peace within Ukraine itself. And the idea of the Minsk II agreement was that the eastern part of Ukraine, which is ethnically overwhelmingly Russian, would have autonomy within Ukraine, a federal Ukraine. And the United States opposed federalization. And the Ukrainians opposed it. They signed the treaty. The UN Security Council endorsed the treaty. And they blew it off, the Ukrainians and the Americans. Forget it. We don't have to implement it. So by the time Biden came in 2021, Minsk had fallen apart. The U.S. was arming Ukraine to the teeth. Biden came in full Cold Warrior. We're going to expand NATO to Ukraine. Yes, we are. And Putin said, no, you're not. And in December 17, 2021, Putin put on the table a draft U.S.-Russia security agreement based on NATO not enlarging to Ukraine and these missiles not being pointed at Russia. And I called the White House at that point to senior official and said, negotiate. You've got a basis to avoid war. No, don't worry. But anyway, NATO enlargement is none of Russia's business. That's the formal policy of the United States of America. It's mind-bogglingly stupid. NATO enlargement's not part of Russia's business? Well, whose business is it part of?
I want to insert there that Victoria Nuland, of course, is part of the Biden administration, back to the State Department.
Yeah.
Number one. And I want to ask...
She keeps getting promoted as we get deeper and deeper into war. It's unbelievable. But that's the deep state. Is she Republican? Is she Democrat? Doesn't matter. She's for war. That's it.
Well, the Democratic Party has become more fervently the war party than even the Republican Party.
If you look at the base, the Democrats are the warmongers, the Republicans want peace. It's amazing. It's something that's absolutely astounding. But basically, the American public, as usual, has been lied to again and again and again, told that there's no predicate to this war, there's no basis of negotiation. They have no idea that Russia's tried to negotiate all the time throughout. But the U.S. attitude is we don't have to talk to them. And if you don't talk to them, you end up with war. Whereas Kennedy's whole point was we can negotiate with the other side. That was the whole point that brought Kennedy's achievement of the partial nuclear test ban treaty.
Well, it's kind of chronicle of a war foretold, because William Burns, we know from released cables, sent cables back from, he was the ambassador in Moscow, saying it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum in Russia, you don't essentially turn Ukraine into a hostile entity on Russia's border. And he's ignored. Just one last question.
Just to say, by the way, because that memo, which is entitled "Niet means Niet,"
right? Yes,
and saying it's not just Putin, it's all the Russian
that's
political
right,
class.
That's right.
The only reason we saw it is WikiLeaks.
Yes,
because our government is so secretive. The American people are not told anything about what's going on. And your former paper, it is the New York Times, right?
Yes.
They're not. I love the New York Times that published the Pentagon Papers. Now it's completely in the hands of government. Doesn't question a word. Weird.
I have one last question.
And alarming, please.
Well, we'll have to do a show on the deterioration of American journalism. As you know, I'm a very strong supporter of Julian. How, especially having worked in Russia, how do you characterize the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
I characterize it as occurring in the 8th year of a war that started with the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych and escalated after that as totally avoidable because if Biden had negotiated with Putin in December 2021, the war would have been avoided. I regard it as an attempt at the beginning to force Ukraine to the negotiating table. And within a few days of the launch of this so-called special military operation, which was not an invasion at the scale to take over Ukraine, it was a military operation to push Ukraine to the negotiating table. Within a few days, Zelensky said, we can negotiate. A few more days, he said, we can be neutral. We need security guarantees, but we can be neutral. I know because I've spoken to the people that were involved in the negotiations in March 2022, that these negotiations were making tremendous progress on the basis of Ukrainian neutrality and non-enlargement of NATO. And we know that one day the negotiations stopped. The Ukrainians walked in to the Turkish mediators and said, we're not negotiating now. We're taking a break from negotiating. They stopped. Why? The United States told them, you don't need to negotiate. You need to defeat Russia. You don't need to accept neutrality. We've got your back. And the United States pushed Ukraine into an escalating war, thinking that the combination of economic sanctions and HIMARS and other wonder weapons would force Putin to back down. Putin didn't back down. In fact, he mobilized in the summer of 2022. So America's game of chicken didn't exactly work. It led to another round of escalation. And it's especially led to a bloodbath, completely predictable, because Americans have refused, and by Americans, I mean Biden, our president, who's responsible, and his team have rejected negotiations at every turn. And they tell us, which is a lie, that there's no one to negotiate with and that Russia's not interested in negotiating, and that's a lie. The difference is Russia's interested in negotiating an end to NATO enlargement, and the United States is interested in going wherever it pleases. No other country, not even a nuclear superpower, allowed to have a red line on their side in their neighborhood, whereas we are in the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine. So we said 200 years ago, no one in the Western Hemisphere should meddle. And Russia's not allowed to say, we don't want your military on our border. No, that's not Russia's business. So this is a massive, colossal failure of U.S. diplomacy.
I think a lot of people just don't understand unless they've been in the system or they have been a part of it. They've been a lawyer that participates in the system. A lot of people just don't understand how corrupt our criminal justice system can be. Now, your book, you're talking about how police manipulate the media. This is interesting. On the show, I've covered a couple of times how the State Department manipulates corporate media. But I'm curious to hear about policing. So this was the first time I heard about this. I didn't realize the police had an impact on the media. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. A lot of people don't understand, and I personally didn't really have any sense before I started researching the book, of the extraordinary efforts that not just the police, you have to keep in mind, this is a much bigger punishment bureaucracy. It's the police, but it's also prosecutors and prison and probation guards and officers and all of their unions. And then it's at every stage of the criminal process, there are multi-billion-dollar industries, like the money bail industry, which exists only in the US and the Philippines. There's the private prison industry. There's the industries that profit off of everything that happens in jail and prison. So medical care and commissary and phone calls and all of this stuff. There's a massive swath of our society that is profiting off of this. I haven't even gotten into all the surveillance companies and weapons manufacturers and construction companies and the people that make the tasers and the cameras and the guns. Anyway, so there's a lot of people who benefit from our society thinking that the way to reduce interpersonal harm and violence is through investment in punishment, as opposed to meeting people's basic needs. That's the fight, really, at the core, right? And what I learned is that there's also a multi-billion-dollar policing public relations industry. So you look at a city like Chicago. On the day that Chicago police murdered Laquan McDonald, buried and hid that video until Rahm Emanuel could get reelected, right? Until a judge ordered them to release it. They had 4 full-time public relations officers, okay? Today, about a decade later, as you and I are talking, Chicago police have over 50 full-time information manipulation officers, okay? The Los Angeles Sheriff, 42 full-time employees doing information manipulation that we know of. LAPD has another 25. Okay, NYPD has almost 90. So when you think about what are these people doing all over the country, what I explore in my book are so many ways in which we don't even think about. But like, for example, every single day, there's a million things that happen in the world. And the news has to decide which 8 or 10 or 15 it's going to tell us about and which ones we're going to ignore. And there's a bustling industry of people underneath every story you see deciding this is a story for you to hear, and these other stories you're not going to get told. And they're also deciding who's going to be quoted in the story, how is it going to be framed, what language is used, who's going to be presented to you as an expert to help you understand the story. And a lot of this stuff is actually very sophisticated and planned at kind of the highest levels of the punishment bureaucracy, and that has an effect on everything that we see in the daily news.
This is very interesting. I didn't know that police had that. I really didn't. But now that you mention it, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I've told my audience before is that the police brutality cases that you hear about, that's just a fraction of the actual number. The media decides which police brutality cases they're going to cover. So while every major news outlet covered George Floyd, there were many other cases like that just was not in the media or was just buried. I interviewed a local resident here in Massachusetts who went directly to even the local news about police brutality incident here, and even local news would not cover it. And so the media really is the vehicle to get information out. And if the media is being controlled by whatever, factions, then that is going to limit the information that people have about said subject.
Absolutely. I think it's important to understand that there were these uprisings in 2020 after the killing of George Floyd. But police in the United States killed more people in 2021 than they did in 2020. And they killed more people in 2022 than they did in 2021, and more people in 2023 than they did in 2022, and more people in 2024 than they did in 2023. So these problems are persistent. And what's really interesting, if you go through the historical archives of radio and newspaper and eventually television throughout the course of the 20th century, in every decade, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you can find all of these articles about the systemic and rampant problems of police brutality. And you can find all these articles about the problems of jail and prison conditions and how prisons are warehouses for the poor. And there's all of these things, right? And yet the size and power of those systems has only increased. And we now are throwing people in jail cells in this country at a rate about 6 times our own historical average up until about 1980, and about 5 to 10 times other comparable countries. And we're putting Black people in jail cells at 6 times the rate of South Africa at the height of apartheid. So these systems are enormously resilient. And what I try to do in the book is I try to explain for people why year after year, decade after decade, we can be seeing the same problems, and what narratives are we being told about why the answer to all of these problems, including the system's own violence, is always the system needs more money and resources. That's always the answer we're offered. And I think it's a fascinating story to try to peel apart the ways in which, because I don't think it's as straightforward as saying, oh, there's this massive conspiracy and there's a few people deciding. It's a very complex issue. It has to do with who owns mainstream news media, but it also has to do with the ideologies and propaganda that even people that work in the media are subjected to, what they've learned and the ignorance that they exhibit, and also has to do with like this sort of news gathering process and the policing public relations industry. And there's so many things that are combining to determine the very biased and very distorted view of the world that we're presented in the mainstream news.
It's interesting, the numbers that you gave about the increase of police brutality cases under the Biden presidency. This is something that I tried to explain to people as well. And I think some people didn't believe it because they were like, well, I'm not hearing about this anywhere on any major news outlet. And I'm like, but ask yourself why. Ask yourself why now we're not hearing about the police brutality cases under, Biden's presidency as much as we did under Trump's presidency. So it would make people assume that there were more police brutality cases under Donald Trump's first term than there were under Biden's term. But the data shows that's actually not correct. And this is why I think it's so important that people do pay attention to independent media, right? Because we are out there explaining these things and hopefully covering some of these stories that mainstream media is not covering at all. What's interesting to me when I think about the media and I would say the police sphere, it's interesting that we usually see certain police departments on the news. Like we usually see the NYPD or LAPD or Chicago PD. And this is another narrative that people will have, is that all the crime is happening in the blue cities. But there's also crime happening in red rural areas as well, but the media doesn't cover it. Why do you think there is that focus where the media tends to zone in on a select few of police departments?
That's such an important question. And I think it's a very complicated answer. I want to say, initially, understand that answer. In my opinion, you have to understand something that I write about in the book called the volume of news and how to lie with the truth. Because these are two really important concepts that the book explores that kind of explain how we're being misled. And for example, crime rates are higher in Republican-controlled red state areas as a matter of historical empirical reality. And that's because, for many reasons, but one of the big ones is the things that actually determine levels of violence in a society are big features of our society, like levels of inequality and poverty, access to healthcare. So one of the most significant drivers of interpersonal harm and crime is Medicaid expansion. The more you give poor people healthcare, the more you reduce things like police arrests and jailing and crime. We know that. Same with early childhood education. These are among the most important interventions. Same with reducing lead poisoning for children. These are all hugely important things. Same with just housing and et cetera. You could go on and on and on, right? It has nothing to do with policies of the police or whether a sentence should be 12 years or 9 years or 7 years. Like, those things have nothing to do with levels of violence in a society. It's these deeper features of society about whether people are getting their needs met. And so the volume of news distorts all of that. It distracts us from all of those things. So let me give you an example. A few years ago, there was you probably saw this viral video, tens of millions of views, of a shoplifting from a Walgreens in San Francisco. And a guy was like on a bicycle and he like escaped. It was actually kind of a cool shoplifting. I mean, he like somehow got out the door on his bicycle. That one instance of shoplifting spawned 309 news stories in local and national outlets. At the same time, not a single outlet covered the wage theft by Walgreens from its own employees. Okay? Much larger set of crimes. Okay? So the volume of news affects what we think of as urgent and affects our subjective understanding of the world. They created a shoplifting and retail theft epidemic at a time when we now know from looking at the data years later, shoplifting was not up. And property crime generally was at historic lows in the United States the last few years. So, but with all these stories, it's kind of like, if you asked me about Michael Jordan, I could make you a video of every missed shot in Michael Jordan's career. It'd be like 9 hours long of just him missing shot after shot after shot after shot after shot. And I showed it to you, you'd be like, if you'd never seen the NBA, you might think, oh my gosh, this is a really bad basketball player. He's missing all these shots. I've taken entirely true anecdotes, but I've put them together in a way that creates a false impression. That's what the news media does with crime. And that's what the news media does with crime in New York, in Chicago, in San Francisco. It's creating a false impression, not only that crime is always rising, and when in fact, the last 25 years, crime has been down almost every single year, but it creates the false impression that somehow it's only democratic controlled cities or progressive cities or cities with lots of black people and lots of immigrants that where there's crime, which is completely false. But the building blocks of that are actually true stories, which is really important, because another thing I talk about in the book, the very best propaganda is based on true facts. That's how you really mislead people.
Because basically what the media is doing is they're basically selecting some true stories, but they're not reporting the others.
In a nutshell, that's the best way to mislead people. Because if you just reported stories that anybody could show are completely false, like, the photo was doctored or something like that, people aren't going to trust you. But if the stories you're reporting are themselves, they are true, and you're seeing real incidents of armed robbery or homicide or something, your defense mechanisms are down a little bit. And it's harder for you to tell that, well, wait a second, I believe murder is up this year because I've seen 40 stories on the news about it, when in fact, last year, murder was way higher, it's just the news did fewer stories about it, so I thought murder was lower last year. So it's very hard for the ordinary news consumer to have any understanding of the world when they're constantly being bombarded with these anecdotes, and it gives the people who are using the anecdotes tremendous power over what people believe about the world. So, I mentioned that people always think crime is up. Well, there's something really interesting about that public policy poll. People are much more accurate about crime in their own neighborhood than they are about crime in our society. Because the more your view is based on your own experience, the more accurate it is about crime. But the more your view is based on what the news is telling you about other neighborhoods or other cities or other states, the less accurate. Because it's filtered through this mass media, which has all of these biases that I talk about in the propaganda book.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about crime being up, because another report that I saw on both outlets, CNN News and Fox News, they were talking about the crime rate increase after 2020. But what they didn't explain is that, of course, the crime rate was significantly low in 2020, because what happened in 2020? We had the pandemic. There were a lot of states that were under lockdown. I know my state of Massachusetts here was locked down. So if we're locked down, of course, the crime rate was going to be significantly lower. But I sat there and I watched CNN and Fox News mislead their viewers into believing that, or not really mislead, but intentionally omit the information that it was significantly low in 2020 because of the pandemic.
There's a couple of problems going on here. First of all, this obsession in the news media about whether like crime is up from last month or last year, it ignores what the people who study these issues actually all understand, which is that you shouldn't be looking at short-term fluctuations in police-reported crime. Like, on any given year, you know, it could go up or down a little bit. You know, that's not really the most relevant thing. What's important is to understand bigger, longer trends in society so that you can start to understand that the actual drivers in a big way of levels of interpersonal harm are these root causes. Like I mentioned before, housing, healthcare, inequality, poverty, education, like levels of isolation and loneliness in a society actually dictate whether people hurt each other much more than policies relating to the police. Like, if people are involved in their community and there's places for young people to go, play sports, do theater, do music, do arts, if people have good jobs, have a safe place to live, if they're getting healthcare and treatment that they need, they don't hurt each other. That's why all these other societies that spend way less money on police, prosecution, and prisons have lower crime in the United States. So I think it's just absolutely essential for anyone, consuming the news to understand that it's very focused on like June's crime numbers as opposed to July's crime numbers as opposed to May's crime numbers is itself meaningless. It's just propaganda designed to get you to think that short-term policy tweaks by the police or prosecutors are moving crime when they're not. It's very important to understand that. And then something that they did in the pandemic, like you mentioned, is instead of comparing comparable years like 2021 and 2019, right? Oh, they compared 2021 and 2020. And then, you can almost always compare 1 month to another month or 1 year to another year and find some kind of crime that's going up and some kind of crime that's going down. You can create a fear-mongering narrative almost anytime you want through the manipulation of statistics.
Yeah, and you mentioned like people having their needs being met. This is why when we look at the data for countries like Denmark or Germany or France, and this is not to say those countries have zero crime, but they don't have as much crime as we do here in the United States. And what do all those countries have in common? Like everybody, to your point, everyone has healthcare. Germany has free university. I mean, it's very different when you take care of the people and their needs are met. They're less likely to commit crime. Would you say that a lot of crime is connected to poverty in that sense?
Absolutely. So one of the most robust findings in all the literature is that levels of inequality and deprivation and poverty impact levels of crime. Now, we're using the term crime here, but I just want to point out, like I talked about in the book, there's lots of like crime that wealthy people commit that isn't thought of as crime, is not reported as crime. It's not, thought of as crime, and that's because, the police use terms like, law enforcement because they want us to think that like a law is broken, a law is enforced. It's just objective. But in reality, people who call themselves law enforcement in our society are only enforcing some laws against some people some of the time in some places. It's why you have brutal, violent raids of the homes of poor families and black families for drugs, when you don't see raids of Yale University dorm rooms for drugs or Goldman Sachs headquarters, or you don't see like undercover cops looking into like fraud at corporate accounting firms, and you just don't. Our society finds crimes where it chooses to look for them, and it ignores crimes where it chooses to ignore them. So even the concept of crime is obviously determined by who has power in our society. But even if you're to focus on police-reported crime, okay, or violent crime, or sexual crime, those things are determined by these deeper features of our society. Like, levels of sexual violence in a society have no correlation to policing. That's not why. And another thing you have to understand is most sexual violence in our society is between people who know each other. Most violent crime in our society is not perpetrated by strangers. It's by people who know each other. And that's a really uncomfortable fact for the policing industrial complex, because people understand intuitively that the reasons that intimate loved ones and acquaintances and family members harm each other are not because there's like not enough prison sentences, or not because there's no police officer stationed in their living room. It's because of deeper things like stress and environmental root causes and toxic masculinity and like all of these like features of our culture and our society. We know how to solve them, and other countries are doing a much better job at solving them.
What's the media's goal here? Are they trying to increase crime? Like when they cover certain stories, are they trying to, and I say this because I remember going back to the Virginia Tech shooter, right? I don't know if you remember this, but there was a young student at Virginia Tech College, and it was a mass shooting. This was years ago. And the media decided to stop showing his picture because they didn't want to promote copycats. And they actually said that. So when the media is choosing to talk about these crime statistics and tell you crime is continuing to increase, when they select certain stories, particularly also about like police brutality, and ignore others, is the media trying to anger the American people? What are they trying to do?
I think we have to always understand that the motivations are not so simplistic and so straightforward, and that different people in the media have really different incentives and really different goals and really different ideologies, right? So I don't think there's like one answer to your question. I think it's a little bit more complicated with respect to different types of media. So the people who work at the New York Post and Fox News have a slightly different set of incentives and different goals as the people that work at the New York Times and MSNBC. And I think one of the most important features of my book, though, is I show how all of those people are serving very similar ends. They're all adopting and validating and normalizing and pushing far-right mythologies and misinformation and policies, right? But the difference is that any good propagandist understands that propaganda has to be tailored to the audience. So the way that Fox News talks about these things is a little bit different than the way New York Times talks about it, because Fox News is talking to largely conservative Republican kind of crowd. The New York Times' job is to get well-meaning progressives and liberals to support really harmful, unjust, completely ineffective policy. And so, but it uses a language of sort of progressive jargon and care, and it constructs a world of faux expertise and consensus and progressive values around a lot of these same discredited policies. That's one of the most important things that I show with enormous and meticulous attention to evidence and detail in the book, because I know it's going to be hard for a lot of people to believe the role that like the major ABC, CBS, New York Times, your local news, like people don't think of them as propaganda outlets or as like Fox News, but like you really have to, and that's why I spend so much time in the New York Times. Now, I will say, a lot of my book could not have been done without the work of hundreds of journalists who reached out to me to help me build my archive. There's so many people in these institutions who do not believe in what the institutions are doing, and who recognize how so much of it is misleading so many people for policies that are causing so much harm to the most vulnerable people in our societies. And so I think that the motivations are really complex. There's certainly some people at high levels of the New York Times that know exactly what they're doing, and for a variety of political and economic reasons have incentive to keep boosting, whether it's the military-industrial complex or punishment bureaucracy, or a pro-Israel agenda, or whatever it is, right? Pro-pharmaceutical company, pro-private equity, right? Obviously, the ownership of these outlets, who advertises in them, affects, as Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman wrote in Manufacturing Consent, really determines what's going on. But there's also like a whole group of editors and reporters and people, producers who work at these institutions that aren't necessarily thinking when they go to work each day, I'm going to try to do this, I'm going to make sure that, you know, we cover crime in a way that's going to mislead people. There's a lot of like failure to think critically about how what they're doing is contributing to this stuff. There's a lot of bad habits. There's a lot of ignorance. And so one of the most heartening things for me in doing this work on social media and then writing this book is how many people within all these news organizations, and then also how many independent journalists like you and others have reached out to me and said, oh, like, I hadn't thought about things this way, and I want to think about things a little bit differently. I want to develop a more critical understanding of this, and that's given me a lot of hope, because a lot of journalists, like even something simple, like journalists over the last few years organized within major media outlets who largely stopped the practice of using mugshots of black criminal defendants, people who've been arrested, because there was a lot of research that showed that just the constant mugshots on the news of black people, accused but not convicted of crimes by the police, was having really terrible effects in our society that have been documented. So there's lots of victories like that, and so many more I talk about in the book that give me hope that like we can organize within the journalistic profession, especially with a lot of the new media, independent media that are sprouting up, to take a really different approach that's more critical.
Yeah, I totally hear where you're coming from. It's one of the reasons why I decided, I think it was like 2 years ago, not to show the actual police beatings or shootings like on my show, because it's tragic, and then also, you know, it can make people feel a certain way, you know. So I that was something that I did away with, where I wouldn't show that anymore. I would lead up to that and then say, okay, we can talk about what happened from there. I think it's interesting, the police departments, it's almost as if so they decide what the media is going to be able to cover, which incidents the media is going to be able to cover. Is that the case?
I was contacted by a local TV news anchor. I think his story is really perfect for answering your question, okay? He contacts me and he says, I've been reading what you're writing, and I totally agree with you. And I've talked about it with all my producers and the other anchors and the reporters, and we don't want to be a part of this. We don't want to, but you have to understand the problem that we have. We are a small-ish news station, you know? We don't have a lot of money. In fact, like many local news organizations around the U.S., we've been divested from. We don't have like enormous funds. And the police make it so easy for us every day. Every day, they send us 14 stories. And it's not just police reports with the story. They send us audio, they send us video, they send us charts, they send us graphs, they send us people to quote, they send us experts to like put the stuff in context. And so as a news organization, we have to fill like 23 minutes of content at 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. and then again at 7 a.m. in the morning. And so faced with that kind of crunch, we end up putting on TV a lot of what the police are saying. And it's because in our local community, we haven't built up the pipelines of sources from, let's say, the people that are inspecting the playgrounds where your children are playing for lead every day, or the people that are in housing court looking at what all the landlords are doing to people, refusing to install smoke detectors and rats and roaches. And like, it turns out what we've seen around the country is like, it's not that the public really demands and wants to watch stories about poor people and immigrants and black people as criminals. In fact, like a bad landlord of the week segment is very popular. A bad employer of the week who's stealing wages from their, but people want to watch stories about like what local teachers are seeing in the classroom, what local nurses are seeing at the hospital. And it's just that those groups aren't getting paid massive public relations budgets to feed stories to the news every single day.
Essentially, what I've been trying to explain to the American public since 2022, and before then, since 2014, I and a small other group of Americans from my little corner of the internet have been trying to educate and warn Americans about the impending war with a nuclear-powered Russia that seemed inevitable after the Maidan coup, which was backed by the U.S., funded to the hilt by USAID and NED, and the annexation of Crimea that followed. And so to have a president acknowledge in his clumsy, typically sort of cretinous way, but to have him acknowledge that this war was the most provoked war in modern history. Of course, Zelensky didn't literally start it. He didn't invade himself. But that the invasion was one of the most provoked wars, the Russian special military operation in modern history, was so remarkable. And once you start to understand that and examine the history, then the entire narrative of this brave, plucky little Ukraine fighting on the front lines of freedom for democracy as just a victim of a Russia that seeks to reestablish the Soviet Union, but in conservative right-wing form. It all falls apart in your hands. It disappears like US aid money sent to Kiev. And that's what's happening now. The American public is starting to wake up from years of propaganda, war propaganda, and realizing that they've been hacked. And it was this lie that Putin's invasion of Russia was unprovoked. We heard it again and again in Clockwork Orange style with our eyelids peeled back from corporate media. Once that's understood to be disinformation and a lie, there's no support left for this project. And so that's what Trump has done. His opponents can call him a Russian puppet, claim the Kremlin hacked his brain, all they want. But we have been explaining this real history, and no American, especially the American military, the military brass, no American politician would have accepted what Russia was expected to accept when, after 2014, a hostile foreign power hand-selected the government and the leadership right on its border, and then began a massive military buildup through a hostile military alliance, which aimed to, in the words of the Pentagon-aligned think tank RAND, overextend and unbalance Russia. That was the title of the paper that was released by RAND 2 days after Zelensky was elected in April 2019. Zelensky was elected with U.S. advisors. His ministers were from the United States. The whole country was run by the U.S. and NATO. And the U.S. would have never accepted something like that if Russia or China were backing a government in Mexico aimed at overextending and unbalancing America. The U.S. military would send B-52s to bomb everywhere between Calexico and Teotihuacan. It would be a carpet bombing campaign like we've never seen before. They would topple the government. They would never allow it, but Russia was expected to allow this. And I mean, leading all the way up to the days before Russia launched its SMO and invaded Ukraine, what was happening? The OSCE was documenting a record number of violations of the ceasefire in the Donbass, almost all of them by the Ukrainian military. And then days before, because they were documenting those violations, the U.S. removes its observers, and Zelensky's government and his military leadership announced that they will not re-engage in Minsk negotiations with the Donbass separatists while the population of the Donbass is under fire, and Putin finally moves in. And there's a whole history before that. But even Jens Stoltenberg, who was the head of NATO, General Secretary in 2023, admitted the same thing, or said the same thing that Donald Trump said, but from an alternately opposite angle, when he said this war actually started in 2014. Right. Those are his exact words, with the annexation of Crimea, and then when Russia went and took control over eastern Donbass.
Max, if you were here, we're a few thousand miles apart. If you were here, I would hug you, because everything you've said, you were a lone voice for many, many years before this show came on the scene. You've articulated it brilliantly, succinctly, and correctly. And if anybody wants to double check what Max just said, our mutual friend Scott Horton has written a book that you and I have read and both of us endorsed called Provoked. It's 690 pages and it has 2,000 footnotes. It's inassailable and it demonstrates the detailed, boring but detailed academic version of what Max just summarized. There are rumors in Washington, D.C. This afternoon. I can't report it as fact, but they're just rumors, that Trump has ordered or is about to order that no further American arms be sent to Ukraine. Don't take Donald Trump on, Mr. President Zelensky, because this is what will happen to you. Trump is right. Zelensky is a dictator. Trump is right about the reasons for the start of the war. Somebody around Trump or Trump himself has seen this alternate version. Question: can he get the American foreign policy establishment to turn on a dime the way he wants it to?
Donald Trump is getting the American public on his side. He has, unlike in his first term, the civilian leadership on his side because he's installing loyalists. He has the Democrats on the back foot domestically. They're kind of like he's kind of like a kid, and the Democrats are a bunch of fireflies in a jar, and he's just shaking the jar. And it's very hard for them to respond cohesively to any one part of his agenda because so much is happening so fast. And with Ukraine, you have a country like Israel or Taiwan, which isn't an actual country, that is so dependent on Washington and is so devoid of sovereignty that any cutoff in arms or aid is going to lead to massive destabilization. And I think we could see Ukraine descending into a kind of abyss if the arms fail to come, if the USAID money, which was, as former USAID Director Samantha Power admitted, was paying Ukrainian teachers, pensioners, basically paying the entire government. If that gets cut off, the situation will deteriorate. And the EU is not going to be able to fill the gap.
Right.
I wonder if
that was my next question.
Yeah, I mean, what could happen first is Zelensky gets blamed. He leans so hard on the Democrats and Biden, and the Ukrainian government, but especially under Zelensky, interfered in American politics against Donald Trump. And the Ukrainian civil society groups propped up by USAID and the NED participated in many ways in the narrative around Trump's impeachment and painting Trump as a Putin puppet. And so Zelensky could be blamed domestically by the group that fought hardest since 2014, the neo-Nazis and ultra-nationalists, the Azov types from Western Ukraine, for this defeat. He could be ousted. They're battle-hardened. They're tough. And they lost a lot of casualties. So they'll bring out the stabbed in the back narrative. They could overthrow him. Europe will fail to be able to do anything. Their economies have been battered. The liberal transatlanticist governments are losing right now. They're not going to be able to prop up Zelensky. So the post-Maidan state could actually collapse.
Yeah. So this afternoon, Scott Bessent, who's the new Secretary of the Treasury, basically said if Putin doesn't come to the Putin comes to the negotiating table, we'll consider dropping the sanctions. Well, I thought that was an absurd statement. Prime Minister or Foreign Minister Lavrov was clearly there the other day, made a terrific presentation, and the Russians don't need the sanctions dropped, and Putin doesn't need any coercion. I think Bessent is in over his head and should stay in his lane, and really didn't add anything by making a statement like that. Secretary Rubio said the sanctions will go away. They should go away immediately. The American businesses, according to Foreign Minister Lavrov, American businesses lost $330 billion in revenue due to the Biden sanctions, which are still being continued.
Well, and Russians had around that number stolen. Russian assets just simply stolen by the
Correct.
EU.
Correct.
That money could possibly have to be returned by the
Yeah.
EU. There could be massive lawsuits and a major legal battle. But the U.S. economy has suffered for sure. And the knock-on effect of sanctioning Russia and Biden attempting to turn the ruble to ruble was that the American consumer paid at the pump. And that led to higher inflation. Higher inflation led to higher interest rates. No one would talk about this publicly, but that was one of the main factors in inflation. So the America First position would be, let's end these sanctions and let the oil flow freely and the gas flow freely to Europe as well.
And if I may, let the vodka flow freely. There's 100,000 bottles of Stolichnaya in a warehouse at Port Newark, which can't be sold and distributed in the United States and can't even be shipped back to Russia. They're just sitting there. I don't know who's paying for it, but nobody's making money on vodka that's sitting in a warehouse. 100,000 bottles is a lot of vodka.
Send it to Americans who can't afford eggs and can't afford woke Finnish NATO vodka. Let's give us some surplus vodka. But seriously, I mean, what could be happening with Venezuela as well? What the sensible thing to do, the America First thing to do, the realist thing to do, is Venezuela accept its migrants, and the Trump administration relieves sanctions so Venezuela can refine its oil in Texas, and Americans can have cheap oil again, and Venezuela can have an economy so people won't want to flee Venezuela because they would rather be there at home. This would end two problems with one stone.
Sorry,
The only problem
back to my question earlier. I fully agree with everything you're saying, but this requires a sea change in thinking of the foreign policy establishment from Marco Rubio on down, does it not? These people have all condemned Maduro and condemned Venezuela. They think the president of Venezuela is a grad student in Miami, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I mean, Rubio is part of this repugnant class element in the United States of Cuban American and Venezuelan upper middle class, upper class de facto war lobbyists who basically have used this country as a base to organize regime change operations against their former homes. And in the case of Venezuela, it doesn't serve any U.S. interest unless you are so ideologically zealous that you actually think that destroying that country's economy is going to just end communism as we know it. And the Ukrainian American and Ukrainian Canadian lobby has played a similar role in the same way the Israel lobby has played. And so it's really up to the Trump administration. I don't think Donald Trump is quite articulate enough to do it, but it's up to the Trump administration to illustrate how these insidious elements inside the United States have subverted U.S. foreign policy so that it is not putting America first. And I don't know if they can do it, but they're going to have to, because the U.S. media is fully on board with the interventionist agenda, and it just hasn't served the American consumer well. It's maybe served contractors well, and a part of the American economy. That's why Zelensky is constantly complaining that at least 50% of the money that's supposed to be allotted for Ukraine is just simply missing. It's all gone back into the Northern Virginia and Colorado to the defense contractors. That's where it's going. That's where it was intended to go. It's money laundering. Zelensky shot himself in the foot by complaining about the money laundering because Trump wound up using it against him. And this was brilliant on Trump's part. He actually illustrated how dumping billions of dollars into Project Ukraine is detrimental to the average American. But there's a whole class of Americans which are interwoven within U.S. corporate media and the Acela corridor who have so much skin in the imperial game that they're afraid, desperately afraid of what it will mean to end this war and end this gravy train.
I want to talk to you a little bit about Israel, if I might. Does Netanyahu still want and need to resume the slaughter in Gaza?
Netanyahu really served better by regional war. I don't think Netanyahu wants to re-enter Gaza, but there are other elements that do, and there is a momentum now, a very dangerous momentum, that has led even Steve Witkoff, who's Trump's golf buddy turned foreign policy problem solver, to warn that phase 2 looks daunting in the negotiations. Phase 2 is when the Israelis will have to leave Gaza. Their presence in Gaza will end. And Hamas is doing everything it can to facilitate phase 2. It has offered all captives, hostages inside Gaza.
Just let me interrupt you because I need you to educate me. Has phase 2 been agreed to, or does Witkoff still have to negotiate it between Hamas and Netanyahu?
It's been agreed to as a kind of benchmark, but as we know in these negotiations, all the benchmarks are fungible according to the occupier in Israel. And one of the main reasons phase 2 could collapse, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, we don't have time, but most immediately, what happened today, the Bibas family, the remains were returned. Hamas handed them over. These are the remains of a young child and a mother. Yarden Bibas was let out, the father. And Yarden Bibas, when he was in captivity, delivered a video message. Obviously, there was an element of coercion because he's in captivity, but he delivered a video message appeal to Netanyahu and the Israeli military, asking them to simply negotiate for his release. Hamas had already negotiated and wanted to hand him and the family over so that he could bury his family with a proper burial inside Israel because Israel had killed them in an airstrike. The U.S. media, the Western media, refuses to tell the world that the Bibas family were casualties of the Hannibal Directive, like not only hundreds of Israelis on October 7th, even the majority of Jewish Israeli casualties, but also as many as 40 Jewish Israeli captives inside Gaza. Noah Calderon, the niece of a hostage, I think his name is Ofer Calderon, who went on Israeli media and declared that the Israeli government under Netanyahu was deliberately killing the hostages under the Hannibal Directive to deprive Hamas of negotiating leverage. And that's what happened to the Bibas family. But in Israel, the Jewish Israeli public and the broader Zionist movement is painting this as some ritual baby killing by Hamas, that they slaughtered this baby and are now handing him back. And the Western media and the Israeli government colluded to prevent the Jewish Israeli public from learning the truth so that they would have this violent outpouring of emotion when the bodies were finally returned in order to upend the ceasefire before phase 2. So there's a deliberate effort to sabotage.
Hasn't Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister and indicted war criminal, acknowledged that when he was defense minister, he ordered the employment of the Hannibal Directive and his orders were complied with?
This was just yet another confirmation that the Hannibal Directive was employed on a mass scale. Mass Hannibal, as a colonel serving under Gallant declared on October 7th. And we don't know how many were killed under it, but Yediot Aharonot, which is the most popular newspaper in Israel, reported that over 70 cars were shelled deliberately heading back into Gaza by the Israeli military, by jets, by helicopters, tanks, many of them containing Jewish Israeli citizens. We know that houses were shelled by tanks in Kibbutz Be'eri, in other kibbutzim, and we know that even an Israeli military base at the Erez Crossing was shelled by the Israeli military, killing many Israeli soldiers. But Gallant is comfortable admitting this now because he's out of government. It's too late to do anything about it. And it looks as though a large number of the 1,200, 1,100 killed on October 7th were killed by the Israeli military. And keep in mind also that of that 1,100, at least 400 were active duty uniformed Israeli soldiers who are basically combatants. So they don't really count there.
One last subject matter about Netanyahu, if I may. Is he attempting to fire the head of Shin Bet because Shin Bet is investigating corruption in Netanyahu's own office, corruption involving Qatar?
Well, that would be this is a major scandal that's erupted, and I don't know how much there is to it, but key advisors to Netanyahu have been accused of being on the take from Qatar during negotiations. It's called Qatar Gate inside Israel. Qatar is seen as kind of like an enemy nation that Israel has to deal with. And it's Netanyahu's opponents who are attacking him. And their main point of attack is that Netanyahu had an underhanded kind of backdoor relationship with Hamas through Qatar, and that this relationship now appears to have been incentivized through some kind of bribery. And I don't know what the details are, but it's just another case for the so-called gatekeepers in Israel, the intelligence, military intelligence apparatus, what's really the Israeli deep state, to investigate that they've been weakened so much after Netanyahu's tenure, which goes back with a brief interregnum all the way to 2009. They're so weak. I mean, the Labor Party in Israel is dead. The Meretz Party is dead. Netanyahu's opponents, many of them actually come out of the Likud party. So I don't know where it can go at this point. Right. But it will ultimately come to a head when there is a real October 7th independent investigation or parliamentary investigation in Israel.
Max Blumenthal, my dear friend.
This is the fun one. You got to end with a fun one. Argentina's Javier Milei faces impeachment for promoting a crypto scam. That's right. Wyatt Reed and Oscar Leon from the Gray Zone did a great write-up on this. Online, says the coin was being launched in honor of Javier Milei's libertarian ideas and was designed to strengthen the Argentine economy from the ground up by supporting entrepreneurship and innovation. The token immediately shot up from 27 cents to well over $4, then dropped to less than 20 cents in a matter of hours as a tiny handful of insiders who owned over 80% of the supply dumped their holdings, draining an estimated $280 million from the unsuspecting buyers. While horrified owners discovered they'd been victimized by a classic pump and dump scheme, Milei promptly deleted his post publicizing the coin. So far, Davis remains the only figure to have conceded to participating in the plot. In an interview published on February 17th, Davis made a series of highly incriminating admissions, including acknowledging that insiders around him had sold off huge quantities of the token, making off with over $100 million while tanking the price, and revealing that he personally paid out $5 million of the proceeds to an acquaintance who was apparently lost that money in the scam. Davis defended his actions by describing the token, which was explicitly marketed as a social investment vehicle for the state of Argentina, as, quote, dog shit. I mean, these guys are funny. This is like a sci-fi comedy. It's like a futuristic comedy. All cryptocurrency is extractive to some degree or a zero-sum game. None of it has value. Whether it's a fucking meme coin or it's a giant utility project, it is all dog shit. Davis went on to explain that members of the team sniped the token, a method by which crypto insiders use algorithmic bots to identify new tokens and other situations ripe for manipulation, but claimed they only did it to prevent other, more predatory investors from doing so. Davis also admits to having participated in the launch and having subsequently sniped the infamous Melania meme coin, the Melania Trump meme coin. So here is a clip from the interview.
But if you launch the coin, isn't it unfair for you to snipe the coin?
So I would say no, and I would say that for a couple different reasons.
Here's this guy's take.
Disastrous evening from the meme coin trenches. Javier Milei literally murdered millions of dollars from all of the meme coiners this evening. After launching his token, it pumped up to somewhere near $4 billion before promptly imploding, and it's been down only since because the literal president of the country of Argentina decided to tweet about this, post this on his Instagram, post this on his Facebook, but now it's all ended in absolute devastation. The real question is this story going to make it to the mainstream? Because this guy basically just rugged everybody in this space. It's absolutely devastating.
Now, this guy gave a pretty sober reaction to it. This guy, a little less sober reaction to it.
I'm broke! I'm broke! I'm fucking broke! I'm gonna find you! I'm gonna find you, Dennis! I'm gonna find you! You rugged me! I have nothing! I have to sell my Rolex! I have to sell it! I have to sell all my shit! And I don't have anything! Against you pieces of shit! You rugged me! You all rugged me, bro! And I'm gonna find you! I'm gonna find you!
You rugged me, bro. That's gonna be the name of this episode.
He was rugged. He was rugged.
Of course.
I mean, this is what they did was disgusting. And listen, I appreciate Wyatt Reed. That was such a gray zone-y article, right? Like, just kind of pointing out the fact that this guy's going to weasel out and act like he never had any type of relationship with these people, where they were simply easily pointing out, no, he's met he's talked to 3 of these people. He's met with 2 of them on several occasions. There's no hiding here, buddy. You're in on this. You're exposed. That article that Wyatt wrote is going to be so damaging to the Malay government. Forget about it, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
Israel pushes new atrocity narrative just as ceasefire deadline approaches. A new narrative is being aggressively pushed by Israel and its apologists to justify resuming the Gaza genocide, conveniently just as an important deadline for ceasefire negotiations draws near. The IDF is now claiming that the Israeli children Kafir and Ariel Bibas were both brutally murdered by terrorists while being held hostage in Gaza no later than November 2023. IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari told the press on Friday that, quote, contrary to Hamas's lies, Ariel and Kafir were not killed in an airstrike. Ariel and Kafir Bibas were murdered by terrorists in cold blood. The terrorists did not shoot the 2 young boys, they killed them with their bare hands. Afterward, they committed horrific acts to cover up these atrocities, end quote. Anyone who has been following the events in Gaza over the last year and a half will be unsurprised to learn that Israel provided no evidence to support these incendiary claims. Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement in his signature American English, waving around an enlarged photograph of the children and talking about what savage monsters the Palestinians are. Hamas murdered them in cold blood, Netanyahu says, while the camera zooms in on the adorable little redheads. As the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me. Nothing. This happens just as Netanyahu has been working to sabotage ceasefire negotiations by adding new non-starter demands that were not in the original agreement, just as sources in Israeli media predicted he would do upon his return from Washington earlier this month. The 6-week-long first stage of the ceasefire deal with Hamas is set to expire at the beginning of March. This is obvious babies on bayonets atrocity propaganda, being released at the most convenient of times. After Israel has been caught lying about beheaded babies and mass rapes and so much more, only an idiot would take any of these claims on faith. But it's doing the job. Now, everywhere you look, you'll see Israel supporters calling to end the ceasefire and reignite the Gaza Holocaust to avenge these innocent children. I just saw an article from Tablet magazine titled "Their Time is Up," subtitled, the murder of the Bibas children caps off an 18-month catalog of horrors that has told us exactly who our Palestinian neighbors are. Backed by a friend in the White House, Israel must secure its future through strong, unilateral action. All this despite the fact that we know the most likely cause of the children's death was the fact that their own government was raining military explosives on places where hostages were being held during that time. Hamas reported back in November 2023 that the Bibas children had been killed in an Israeli airstrike along with their mother. In December 2023, it was reported in the mainstream press that Hamas had offered to return their bodies to Israel, but Israel refused, telling the press that Israel will not address propaganda-based reports coming from Hamas. You don't need to trust Hamas or anyone else to deduce that a woman and 2 children being killed by Israeli airstrikes in an area where many women and children were being killed by Israeli airstrikes every day is much more likely a scenario than Palestinian resistance fighters spontaneously deciding to murder children with their bare hands instead of using them as negotiating leverage as planned. As journalist Mohammed Shahada recently noted on Twitter, Israel already has an established track record of lying about Hamas killing hostages who were actually killed in Israeli airstrikes. In December 2023, Israel informed the families of 3 hostages that they had been murdered by Hamas. The mother of one of the hostages kept digging and eventually discovered that they had died of asphyxiation when IDF troops gassed the tunnel they were hiding in. Last September, the IDF admitted that they killed the hostages in an airstrike and lied about it. 3 weeks ago, Shahada correctly predicted in an article with Zedio that Israel was preparing to use the Bibas deaths as an excuse to terminate the ceasefire, long before any of this started. Shahada noticed the way pro-Israel narrative managers had been pushing the line that great vengeance must be exacted upon Gaza if it turns out the Bibas children have been harmed, despite Hamas having announced their deaths more than a year ago. They knew those children were dead, so after the ceasefire was announced in late January, they began circulating the narrative that discovery of their demise would be a valid reason to end it. Israeli forces shot and killed 2 Palestinian children in the West Bank just today, both of them shot in the back. You could be forgiven for not knowing that this happened because the Western political media class have been too focused on the deaths of 2 little white kids to pay attention to such trivialities. Israel needs to keep discovering new Hamas atrocities from 2023, because otherwise it just looks like one-sided atrocities being committed by Israel this whole time. First it was beheaded babies, then later it was we've discovered Hamas did mass rapes, and now it's the Bibas kids. They need to do this because the Hamas attack was the last time anything happened where Israel could frame itself as the victim. So they've been milking it and milking it and milking it for as long as possible while committing orders of magnitude worse abuse in Gaza. It's all designed to drum up outrage and draw sympathy toward Israel and away from the obvious victims who Israel has been abusing, displacing, and mass murdering for a year and a half. As calls to rain vengeance upon Gaza grow louder, remember this. The Bibas kids aren't the reason, they're the excuse. The excuse to advance pre-planned agendas against the Palestinians that have been in place since long before those children were born. Israel and its apologists weaponize sympathy in order to facilitate genocide. Activist and author Eve Engler has been jailed by Montreal police for criticizing Zionist media figure Dalia Kurtz and her support for Israeli atrocities in Gaza, after Kurtz said Engler's comments made her feel, quote, afraid for my safety. After Engler wrote about the charges against him, he reported that he was subsequently charged for harassing the police by drawing public attention to his case. It is fascinating how everyone who supports Israel always collapses into playing the victim at the earliest opportunity. Even Western police forces tasked with persecuting Israel's critics. Israel models this victim LARPing behavior, and its entire goon squad follows its example. But what's interesting is that being perceived as the victim has no value in and of itself. What has value is sympathy. It is sympathy that Israel's supporters are after. Playing the victim is just a means toward that end. If you've ever known anybody with a personality disorder that inclines them toward manipulative behavior, you may have noticed that one of the main things they manipulate in people is their sympathy. They do everything they can to draw as much sympathy toward themselves while working to kill off any sympathy that people might have toward their perceived enemies. They'll sacrifice almost any piece on their psychosocial chessboard in order to control a bit more of the sympathy among the people in their life. They do this because sympathy is a fundamental primer for narrative control. If you sympathize with someone, you are much more likely to believe the things they say and trust their narratives about what's going on. If you lack sympathy for someone, then anything they say is going to be viewed with much more skepticism. This is how humans are wired as social animals. We're evolutionarily conditioned to place more trust in people we perceive as belonging to our own tribe than we place in those outside it. Those within our group are the ones with whom we sympathize. That's why, for example, you'll see Trump supporters start voicing opinions they'd never held before as soon as Trump and his MAGA pundits take a certain position on a given issue. They sympathize with the source, so they espouse its position on that issue. A good manipulator understands this, so they do everything they can to make sure everyone is sympathetic toward them and unsympathetic toward anyone whose interests conflict with theirs. That's why we're still talking about October 7th, even after 16 months of genocidal atrocities and ethnic cleansing plans. Israel and its apologists throughout Western governments and media have been working diligently to draw sympathy toward Israel for those killed and abducted on October 7th, and to stomp out all sympathy for the orders of magnitude more Palestinians who've been killed and abducted by Israel. This has allowed narratives which serve the interests of Israel to dominate the mainstream Western consensus on this issue, thereby bringing in concrete material benefits like weapons, bulldozers, the weakening of Israel's enemies, and the eventual replacement of Palestinians with Israeli Jews on what used to be Palestinian territory. So you can see how victim LARPing leads to sympathy, sympathy leads to believed narratives, and believed narratives lead to concrete material benefits. All skillful manipulators understand this dynamic and use it in their own lives. The only thing that differs is the specific narratives they use and the material benefits they're trying to extract. One manipulator might use sympathy to extract sexual favors from women and deference from men. Another might use it to extract money or resources. Another might use it for status in their social circle. It's on a different scale and has different objectives, but the dynamic is the same. Normal people don't typically understand this, so we're highly susceptible to those kinds of manipulations because they tend to fly under our radar. Normal people place a lot more value on telling the truth and doing what's right than highly manipulative people do, because normal people prioritize human connection much more highly than manipulators. Normal people use language to communicate and understand and connect with each other, while manipulators use it to extract material benefits. These are two drastically different ways of relating to one's social environment, and normal people are often completely unaware that the other way of relating is even a feature in some of the people in their lives. This makes them ideal targets for manipulation. That's what you're seeing when Israel cries victim about October 7th, or Israeli hostages held by Hamas. It's what you see when Israel supporters shriek about an entirely made-up crisis of anti-Semitism in our society. It's what you see when the propaganda machine for the Western Empire frames its enemies as the evil perpetrators of unprovoked aggressions, to which the empire is just an innocent, passive witness, or when they try to generate sympathy for the poor, oppressed people living under this or that evil dictatorship that happens to be sitting on top of a lot of oil. They're manipulating public sympathy so they can control the narrative, so that by controlling the narrative, they can advance their material agendas. There's a legendary video of Norman Finkelstein shouting down a sobbing young Israel apologist on a college campus for trying to play the Holocaust card to silence his criticisms of Israel. One of the reasons this video is so widely shared and resonates with so many people is because Finkelstein happens to be the Jewish son of Holocaust survivors and could therefore speak with great authority. But another reason is because it's such a skillful shutting down of an attempt to manipulate sympathy for the benefit of the Israeli state. By taking sympathy off the table, he took away the Israel apologists' primary weapon. Israel and its supporters understand the power of narrative control better than most. That's why they have a carefully cultivated discipline dedicated to narrative control with its own special name, Hasbara. Hasbara is all about manipulating the narrative about Israel in mainstream public discourse. The real currency of our world is not money or resources, nor gold, nor even weapons. The real currency of our world is narrative and the ability to control it. Because if you can control the narrative, you can control everyone. The strings of our sympathy are continually jerked around without our awareness, by which we are herded into belief systems which advance the interests of the powerful. That's why it's very important to withhold sympathy wherever it's being weaponized. If someone is using a weapon to hurt people, your first order of business is to take away their weapon. You really can't cede any ground to Israel apologists when they try to tug at your heartstrings about the victims of October 7th or fake anti-Semitism emergencies in Western society, because any sympathy you extend in that direction will be used as a weapon to murder and abuse people in the Middle East who've never done anything to you.
It's absolutely mind-numbing. One genocidal statement after another genocidal statement after another genocidal statement after another. So here's the thing. Israel, if you look at what they write in their newspaper, what they post on Facebook, what they tweet, what they say on public affairs, radio and TV programs, they aren't in the least hiding the fact that they're committing genocide. They are proud of it. They are boasting about it. They relish it. They mock every child, woman, and man killed. I find it personally disgusting the way there's this distinction between women and children killed versus men killed, as if every man is a deserving target in Gaza. We should never use that phrase. It's not just women and children. The men don't deserve to live in Gaza. They boast about the homes they destroyed. They take videos of the universities they pulverize. They relish and mock the day as they take their bulldozers, not just to bulldoze homes, but to roll over the bodies that they have killed. So it's not as if we're just relying on the human rights organizations. It's not just as if we're relying only on what the World Health Organization has to say, what UNESCO has to say, what UNICEF has to say, what CARE has to say, what Save the Children has to say, and on and on and on. I said and I repeat, every humanitarian organization is saying the same thing about what's going on or has gone on in Gaza. It is not controversial. But even if there were, even for argument's sake, even if there were doubt about it, maybe they're all anti-Semitic. Maybe CARE is anti-Semitic, and maybe UNICEF is anti-Semitic, and maybe this organization is anti-Semitic, and that organization. Okay, maybe that's true for argument's sake. But then how do you explain all the statements that are made by the senior government officials, by the most influential figures in Israeli civil society? There are times when it's warranted, it's justified to make the distinction between the state and society. Because there are times when the state does not accurately represent the feelings, the sentiments of society in general. I am old enough to have lived through the Vietnam War in my country. And there was a period, you could say during the height of the Vietnam War, where the actions of our state, our government, did not reflect the feelings and sentiments of a large part of our society. However, that cannot, and I don't say this gleefully, I don't say it happily, but that cannot be said of what's happened in the past 16 months. The destruction, the extermination, the genocide in Gaza is not a state project, it's a national project. The entire Israeli society, with its eyes open, with clear presence of mind, with full knowledge of what's going on. They see it in those Facebook postings, they see it in the tweets, they see it everywhere. In the full knowledge of what's going on, they have reached a consensus that it must be that by the end of this conflict, Gaza will be no more. That's the consensus. It's not just Mr. Netanyahu or the former defense minister, Mr. Gallant. Now, some people like to say it's the far right, one of those favorite expressions, the far right, Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben-Gvir. No, first of all, the whole country is the far right. There is no far right. And across the board, from one end of the political spectrum to the other, and from the top to the bottom, it's a national project to, for once and for all, liquidate Gaza.
So let's have a little fun, because CPAC was quite the show this year. Breaking: Elon Musk and Argentine President Javier Milei, that's right, Javier Milei, freshly named in a fraud allegation over an obvious pump and dump rug pull crypto scam. That didn't cancel his invitation to CPAC. No, he showed up anyway. Now, just to give you an idea of how dorky these people are, they played the following video over Bad to the Bone. And I left in the first few seconds of genuine audio just because it's pretty funny. But then we did have to switch to our boogie woogie music for copyright purposes. But here he is meeting Elon backstage at CPAC. The festivities begin. He is there to promote Doge, since Javier Milei was really the ideological inspiration for Doge. We'll say it over and over again. You want to know Elon Musk's political hero? It's not Donald Trump. It's this maniac and now obvious scam artist, Javier Milei. So they took the chainsaw out on the stage. Now, this is short enough. I think we can get away with this. I'm going to have to fudge this a little bit, folks. I'm going to have to stop and pause at annoying moments so we don't get hit with a copyright claim. But the audio here is too priceless not to play. A chainsaw! More time.
I saw your tweet about that. Idiocracy was too kind.
Yeah, Idiocracy was too kind. Dude, they couldn't have come up with this. If they wrote this in Idiocracy, they would have been like, that's too much. People are going to buy it. Now watch this. He's not done. I got to pause it for a second so our copyright thing refreshes. All right, should be safe to play again now. Thank God. Fucking freak. What a fucking freak. Most powerful man in the world. Right here, folks. Make no mistake about it. The singularly most powerful man in the world. Here he is again.
Okay. All right. So as all right, as funny as it is, again, when people tell you who they are, believe them. What intentions do you think Elon Musk has towards the average person, the average poor schmuck, when he will take this guy who just scammed average people out of over $1 billion in an obvious crypto scheme, who took advantage of his position atop the state to run a seedy crypto pump and dump? Essentially, Javier Milei is the Hawk Tuah girl of world leaders.
Right.
And you bring him on a stage with you?
Yep.
Why would you do that if you had any affection at all for the kind of people that he scammed? Not only do they not care about people, they assume, in a lot of cases correctly, that the people have been so reduced to a peasant mindset that they're not going to pay a price for that. And he's right. Not with his base. Not with the people he cares about. Yeah, look at that. That was so cool. He's weapon day on stage with the peso. That was so awesome. That's awesome.
No, they know that the people don't care enough about each other to hold them accountable because the people have no solidarity, because they have completely broken people to the point where that is a concept that is completely foreign to most people, unfortunately, and I would say almost all of the people who still idolize and idol worship. I mean, it's all. I mean, literally. I mean, I know these guys are clowns, but it is indicative of something. Donald Trump is Julius Caesar. I mean, come on, man. Come on. Like, it is such a what a ridiculous place this is. Really, what a ridiculous, and at times hilarious, at times sad, at times infuriating, but at times hilarious. I am not above enjoying a good laugh at what an absolute fucking clown show this place has turned into.
All of these people, I'm not suggesting any violence, but, they should be held accountable by the people for their theft, robbery, abuse, and just absolutely ridiculous hoarding of wealth and resources in a country where, 10 people have about half the wealth? Is that what it is? It's about
something like that, yeah.
It's like 10
number,
people.
yeah.
Do you know how much you have to brainwash and condition people like animals, like horses, to accept that bit, to accept being steered that way? Not only to be steered that way, but to emphatically defend these people, as we so often see? What are you, jealous?
What are you jealous?
Wow.
Yeah.
There's literally nothing that Israel won't do in the name of vengeance and in the name of continuing Zionism. For some people, the takeaway is as long as they're not literally putting people in ovens, as long as they're not doing exactly what the Nazis did, that somehow that's okay. It's actually not okay. Never again doesn't mean never again in the exact same way that the Nazis did it. If that's your takeaway from the Holocaust, you really need to look at yourself and do some soul searching. I'm Jewish. I lost members of my family during the Holocaust, and the truth is, Israel does not represent me. Israel does not make me safer. In fact, it puts me and all Jews in greater danger, because as Israel commits these crimes against humanity and live streams them, and in some cases gleefully live streams them, we've seen soldiers doing this, Israel doing that and saying it's in the name of Jews, that will create anti-Semitism. The idea that Israel represents all Jews is in itself an anti-Semitic idea. The dual loyalty trope says that all Jews are a monolith and we're all loyal to Israel and we can't be trusted to be loyal to other governments, regardless of where we live. That is really what Israel is leaning into. And you have anti-Semites and then the government of Israel, AIPAC and the ADL, all making the same argument, which I think really shows you the dangers and the inherent anti-Semitism of Zionism. People like to claim that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. Well, it's actually not, given that you literally have more Christian Zionists in the world than you have Jewish Zionists. This particular Christian form of Zionism wants Jews to go back to Israel so we can provoke the end times, Armageddon. All Jews except a very lucky 400 who accept Christ as their Lord and Savior burn for all of eternity. So these are the allies. All these cancel culture warriors who talk about right-wingers being canceled are very silent, interestingly enough, when it comes to critics of Israel, who are probably the most canceled people of all. If you're a Palestinian critic of Israel, you're very, very, very canceled. If you're a Jewish critic of Israel, you're less canceled, but you're still canceled. You're just canceled as a self-loathing Jew as opposed to an anti-Semite, which is a significant difference. I mean, I was fired by a network for saying that Israel is an apartheid state, so my being Jewish didn't really protect me. And of course, there's a huge bias in the way that corporate media reports on Israel-Palestine. They're very clear when Russia does something. Russia bombs, Russia strikes, Russia kills. When it's Israel, it's often Palestinians killed in attack, Palestinians dead after bombing. We even know that networks and outlets instruct their writers and reporters not to use certain words like genocide, not even to use the word Palestine. In fact, the reporting by the New York Times on the alleged mass rape used by Hamas was so bad that they had to cancel a podcast that they were going to do about it because there was so little to back it up. Now, on the other hand, you have countless stories and allegations of Israelis raping Palestinians. That got totally ignored. It's really fascinating that we hear time and time again about the 40 beheaded Israeli babies, even though there was no evidence of that. And we do have evidence of actually beheaded babies, children with their heads blown off. I mean, we saw a child literally shredded. Various representatives of the Israeli government are never asked about that. They're never asked to condemn Israel's violence. They're never asked to condemn Israel's terrorism. There was a doctor who was tortured to death. If you don't already feel disturbed by the images of Palestinians or the stories of Palestinians, the story of Hind Rajab, who was left in a car to die when she was begging for help, and Israeli soldiers shot up the car and shot up the ambulance trying to rescue this girl. If that doesn't haunt you, I would really urge you to imagine this happening to a Jewish child during the Holocaust. I think that Jews should understand this, if anything, more than other people, because of our history of being targeted, of being otherized, of being compared to vermin, of attempted extermination, of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and of the world looking the other way. That is something that we have to remember. That happened to us. We can't let that happen to other people. That's not justice. That's not how we honor those killed in the Holocaust. Everything that Israel tells you about its founding, about its history, and about its role today is a lie. Some people think, oh, Israel was founded for Holocaust survivors, and then it got greedy and took over too much land and ruined its founding mission, which was to be a safe haven for Jews. The truth is, it was founded on ethnic cleansing. It was not a utopia. I think it's really eye-opening to look at the actual language of early Zionists, because they were calling their banks colonial trusts. They were talking about how natives always resist colonists. In other words, it's not just critics of Zionism who describe Zionism as colonial, it was the Zionists themselves. Israeli society really had a lot of disdain for Holocaust survivors, so they did something very disgusting. They both weaponized the Holocaust to justify their extermination of Palestinians, and they mistreated Holocaust survivors. In fact, they even referred to them as sapon, which means soap in Hebrew. And that was because there was a myth that Nazis turned Jewish bodies into soap. It's not true, but that was a myth. And the important thing is that people thought that was true, and they thought it would be appropriate to call survivors by that name. Israel wanted to create a new Jew that was armed, that was working the land. They were ashamed of the Jews who were killed. They thought that they went to their slaughter like sheep. They were ashamed of Jews who were religious, Jews who were scholars, Jews who were also cosmopolitan. They really did, ironically, internalize a lot of anti-Semitism. There were Zionist bombings in the Middle East that were used to scare people into emigrating out of Iraq, out of Morocco, and into Israel. That's how little they cared about Jewish people. They bombed synagogues in order to get people to leave the Middle East and go to Israel, where they would be mistreated, which is what happened to Mizrahi Jews. Some were basically put into camps. They rejected Yiddish, which was spoken by Eastern European and diasporic Jews, and they also rejected Arabic, which was spoken by Mizrahi Jews of the Middle East. Yiddish is an amazing language, and it's dying out, and the reason it's dying out is because Israel chose to create modern Hebrew, which no one spoke, and they had a lot of disdain for a lot of Jewish culture. So Israel has always been a racist project in many ways, against Palestinians, but even against Jews themselves. And it's been an anti-Semitic project as well. Not only is Judaism obviously much older than Zionism, but there was Christian Zionism from the very beginning, and that was fueled by anti-Semitism and the desire to get Jews out of Europe. Lord Balfour of the Balfour Declaration was a major anti-Semite. Zionism actually requires anti-Semitism to justify its existence. So for Zionists, they don't want to defeat anti-Semitism, they want to use it to strengthen the state of Israel. It's also true to remember that this is not a conflict about religion or culture. Jews and Christians and Muslims lived in peace, in harmony in many areas of the Middle East for centuries. This is about power. This is about land. This goes back to resources. This goes back to the West wanting to have a foothold in the Middle East. This is not about religion. Jewish anti-Zionism has existed since Zionism. A lot of Jews opposed Zionism because they, I would say rightly, predicted it would create anti-Semitism. There's a very rich radical history of Jewish internationalism. During the Spanish Civil War, which many people see as the dry run for World War II, among all the international brigades, so all the volunteers who left their countries to fight in a war against fascism, the most common language spoken was Yiddish, which speaks to this tradition. If we look at so many struggles like the civil rights movement in the United States, there were lots of Jews involved in that. Jewish people were overrepresented in that movement. If you look at South Africa, some of the most active anti-apartheid activists were Jewish. That's the tradition that I'm proud to be part of, not a tradition which weaponizes trauma, tragedy, and the Holocaust to kill more people. Israel is unsustainable. There's no coming back from this. Something new needs to be created. Jews can live side by side with Muslims and Christians in Palestine, just as they have for centuries. If coexistence is so impossible, and if anti-Semitism is so impossible to fight against, how is it that Jews live in Germany today? Germany was where anti-Semitism turned into the Holocaust, and yet somehow Jews are able to live in Germany in safety. But we're supposed to believe that they can't live in Palestine in safety? Palestine is not the country that created Adolf Hitler. Palestine is not the country that created the Holocaust. The biggest threat to Jewish safety is not a free Palestine, it's Zionism. It's essential to challenge the lies and propaganda of mainstream media.
This isn't gonna work. Okay? This is not gonna work. Hakeem Jeffries is a joke. He fucking sucks, and no amount of "you're just a white leftist criticizing him because he's black" is going to change that. Ever since Donald Trump got elected again, Hakeem Jeffries, who is the so-called leader of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, has done nothing except for make excuses for why the Democrats aren't gonna do shit. Oh, and of course, bash his own base, because that's how Democrats do, okay? Democrats fucking hate their own voters. They fucking hate their base. And here was a scoop a couple weeks ago talking about how Hakeem Jeffries, along with other top Democrats in the House, were enraged. Not at Trump, not at the Republicans, at their own base. They were mad that groups like Move On and Indivisible were mobilizing voters to call their offices. Let me say it again. They were pissed off that their voters and their constituents were calling them and telling them to fight back against Trump and Elon Musk. A closed-door meeting for House Democrats this week included a gripe fest directed at liberal grassroots organizations, sources tell Axios. Members of the Steering and Policy Committee with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the room on Monday complained that activist groups like Move On and Indivisible have facilitated thousands of phone calls to members' offices. You know, as they should. People are pissed, a senior House Democrat who was at the meeting of lawmakers said of the reaction to the calls. Jeffries himself is very frustrated at the groups who are trying to stir up a more confrontational opposition to Trump. Oh, you wouldn't want that. A Jeffries spokesperson disputed the characterization. I like how they say characterization. Not what he said, the characterization. Our office is regularly engaged with dozens of stakeholder groups. That's not what they said. That's not what they were disputing. Stop trying to change the subject here. I love this complaint from Richie Tel Aviv Torres, the congressman who is allegedly representing the Bronx, but all he does is talk about the Israeli regime. Literally, go to his Twitter and all you will see is him doing propaganda on behalf of the Israeli regime for his AIPAC checks. He never talks about the Bronx. I reject and resent the implication that congressional Democrats are just standing by passively. Aw, are you mad that somebody's actually calling out the fact that you don't do anything? But it's okay, Tel Aviv Torres. I know that you're doing a lot, just not for this country. But let's go back to this, okay? Why is it that people are criticizing Hakeem Jeffries today? What he's responding to is Hakeem Jeffries going on Stephen A. Smith's podcast and talking about, wait for it, not Trump or Elon Musk, the far left.
Green left protest me more than they protest Donald Trump. I mean, literally, wherever I go. So I think in part because I've declined, I've refused, I've chosen not to bend the knee to either people on the far left, and certainly not to Donald Trump and the far right.
The far left is mad at me because I don't bend the knee to them. Oh, you're so brave, Hakeem Jeffries. Thank you for being so brave and standing up to the far left that has no power because you have to remind everybody that you despise your own voters. This you? Oh, right. You're busy not bending the knee to the progressives or the left or the far left of your voter base because you're too busy bending the knee to fucking military-industrial complex lobbyists and fucking Elon Musk. But tell me again how the Democrats are going to take on the billionaire class. Oh, and of course we can't forget one of his main constituencies, the Israeli regime. I could keep fucking going. These people are so motherfucking corrupt and they have no interest in being any kind of resistance or check on Trump or on Elon Musk or doing anything to defend the Democratic base. If you're still being a sycophant and defending the Democratic Party, you are particularly pathetic because they fucking hate you. They're not enraged that the Republicans are trying to take your rights away. They're enraged that you're complaining about it. These people are corrupt as fuck, and the reason why they don't fight against the Republicans is because they don't fucking oppose them. You are not going to be any kind of check on establishment power, on the Republicans, on Elon Musk, on the Israeli regime's genocide in Gaza, on the military-industrial complex, on billionaires. You are not going to be a check on any of them because you take checks from the same fucking people that give checks to the Republicans. The Democratic Party is controlled opposition, and every single day of this administration so far, which has only been like 37 days or some shit, has proven exactly that. Every single time you have seen Hakeem Jeffries anywhere, it has been him trashing the left, trashing the far left, or talking about how actually they can't really do anything to stand up to this fascism because they're not in control of the House. Like, what do you want them to do? Like, be an opposition party?
Legislatively, we're going to fight it in the courts, we're going to fight it in the streets. But I'm trying to figure out what leverage we actually have. What leverage do we have?
It's like a week
Republicans have
apart.
repeatedly lectured America. They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's their government. What leverage do we have?
The Democrats are controlled opposition. They're fucking professional losers. What if this shit was a week apart? This is not a leader. This is somebody who is specifically put there by the ruling class to neuter any real opposition to the fascism happening in this country. It's the illusion of pretending that you're there to protect the people and fight against the fascist agenda of the Republicans. But he's not even good at it. They couldn't even wait a fucking month before they started taking tons of bribes again from the very people they're claiming to hold accountable. Jamie Harrison, who was the loser that used to run the DCCC and helped run it into the ground and help Democrats lose an epic election, was just doing this routine a couple days ago, claiming that Ken Klippenstein and others who are criticizing the Democratic Party are only doing so because they're anti-black. Jamie Harrison is a fucking hack. What has Jamie Harrison done besides lose elections and lose the Democrats more elections? In a sane world, we should never have to hear from Jamie Harrison again, but that's not how this works in the failing up Democratic consultant industrial complex grift, where their goal is to raise money for the party, not so they can win, but so that they can enrich themselves and protect their donors. Jamie Harrison should go back to doing lobbying for Lockheed Martin and Bank of America and all the other fucking corporations that he works on behalf of. Notable clients including Wells Fargo, the Podesta Group, and Oracle, because of course. When I went to go get this tweet, I realized this bitch blocked me. Good. And this ain't changing anytime soon because the Democratic voters are not holding them accountable. They've been letting them get away with it, and until they start holding them accountable, this is gonna continue. Because it is losers exactly like Jamie Harrison, and exactly like Hakeem Jeffries, and exactly like Chuck Schumer and every other Democratic leader that continue to help run the country into the ground because they don't actually serve as a fucking opposition party. And they don't really care if they lose. But you can keep giving them your money and being reflexive and reactionary if you want, as they continue to waste it on their doomed loser campaigns. Exhibit 500 of Democrats have absolutely no interest in course correction, self-reflection, or change. Democrats have a 56% disapproval rating. 56%. They are more unpopular than the fucking Republican Party in this country. For the first time in a very long time, there are now more registered Republicans than there are registered Democrats. But keep this up. Keep up more cowbell. Keep making excuses and refusing to course correct and refusing to change and refusing to address the things that people are actually calling on you to address and to defend these incredibly corrupt and incompetent politicians under the guise that you're just defending black people from the horrid leftists that just don't want to see black people in a position position of leadership, these people are clowns. These people are, you're a fucking joke. And people are gonna continue to leave the party, and you're gonna continue to bleed voters, and people are gonna continue to stop giving you money as they should, because nobody should be door knocking, giving money to, or advocating for a party that regularly kicks their own voters in the teeth and tells their base to fuck off. Unless you're into that sort of masochism, which for some reason some Democrats still are.
A Palestinian man who was held captive by Israel for over a year has been released with horrific scarring all over his body. The man, Mohammed Abu Tawili, told local media that the marks came from his captors pouring acid and other chemicals onto his skin in order to torture him. One of his eyes was also destroyed, reportedly in a savage beating. You think you've seen the worst thing you can possibly see in this ever-unfolding nightmare, and then you see something like this. And, of course, the Western press has nothing to say about it. If an Israeli hostage were returned with these signs of torture, the entire Western political media class would demand that everyone in Gaza be exterminated with poison gas. But he's Palestinian, so they ignore him. It's weird how Israel's supporters will just pretend to believe complete nonsense in order to advance Israeli agendas. Oh yeah, Hamas strangled those redheads with their bare hands. Oh my god, Hamas beheaded babies and roasted them in ovens. Oh no, Jeremy Corbyn is a Nazi. We totally believe these things. And what's even weirder is they expect you to pretend to believe they're not pretending. If you come out and say something like, okay, but surely nobody actually believes Hamas has been hiding in every hospital in Gaza, they'll flip out at you. If you point out that it's much more likely the Bibas family was killed by Israeli airstrikes in an area where women and children were getting killed by Israeli airstrikes every day, than that the Israeli government is telling the truth about something they lie about constantly just as a critical ceasefire deadline approaches, you'll be swarmed by Israel supporters not only pretending to be absolutely certain they were murdered by Hamas, but demanding that you pretend to take them seriously. It's just so silly. These freaks act out these ridiculous stage plays where they pretend to be outraged about bogus atrocity propaganda, or pretend to feel unsafe because of some completely made-up anti-Semitism crisis. And everyone knows they're full of shit, but we're supposed to pretend we don't know that, or we're the worst person in the universe. This is a bunch of grown adults rolling around on the floor having manipulative tantrums about made-up nonsense, and then having tantrums at anyone who doesn't take their tantrums seriously. It's like, come on, have a little dignity. Where is your self-respect? Is advancing Israeli information interests and facilitating foreign land grabs really worth debasing yourself like this? Just about the cringiest, most embarrassing thing I've ever witnessed. Oh, and a humble observation. If people protesting genocide and ethnic cleansing makes you feel unsafe, then perhaps you are the fucking problem. Jeff Bezos has just come right out and announced that he's making sweeping changes to the Washington Post's opinion pages, saying, "We are going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets." In other words, he's going to have his news outlet's opinion pages dominated by people arguing in support of unfettered capitalism. One of the richest people in the world bought one of the most influential newspapers in the world to turn it into an even bigger capitalist propaganda rag than it already was. After 4 years and 1 month observing how Trump supporters behave while their cult leader is in power, I can confidently say that they will justify anything their president does. Literally anything. They have a whole sequence of excuses they'll make, which they just flow through until they find one that makes sense to them. And justifying any ugly thing their president does, the excuses go as follows. 1. What Trump did is good. 2. If what Trump did is not good, then it was actually a brilliant strategic 4D chess maneuver designed to advance the greater good in the long term. 3. If no discernible good can come out of this in the long term, then he was just trolling. 4. If he wasn't just trolling, then the deep state made him do it. You can't just go against the deep state, you know. What kind of naive idiot are you?
A Zionist fanatic in Florida where all the crazy stuff happens, disproportionate amounts of bizarre incidents involving guns happen in the U.S. Shot 2 men he thought were Palestinian. They turned out to be Israeli tourists in Miami. And those Israelis claimed that they were, instead of being shot by a Jewish Zionist fanatic, were shot by a anti-Semite, and posted "Death to the Arabs" on Facebook, even though they were shot by a fellow Zionist fanatic. So I don't know what to say about this. 2 false flags.
Well, here's another one, Max, for you that just came up today. Put this one up if you can, and I'll read the headline. This is from Middle East Eye, but it's being reported elsewhere too. Israeli man attacks Jewish woman, mistaking her for a Christian. A woman in occupied East Jerusalem was seriously wounded on Wednesday after an assailant allegedly attacked her with an axe inside her home. Israeli journalist Yossi Eli reported on Thursday that police suspect the attack was motivated by anti-Christian hatred. The victim, a Jewish Israeli woman, was taken to hospital for treatment, while the suspect, also Jewish Israeli, allegedly mistook her for a Christian. So I don't know if this is like an epidemic of Israeli on Israeli violence, where they think that in the Florida case, he thought the 2 Israelis he shot were Palestinians, and here it's this Israeli guy thought that the person he was attacking was a Christian. So is it Israeli society eating itself? I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 false flags don't make a right. I don't know what to say. The guy is claiming a mental health crisis for shooting Israeli tourists. I think the mental health crisis is Zionism. And the Israeli, I mean, this is like an old Borscht Belt joke. Like 2 groups of Zionist fanatics mistake each other for Palestinians, and you won't believe what happened next.
In France, when they talked about raising the retirement age, just talked about it. They didn't even pass a bill. They just talked about raising the retirement age. And the French rioted and caught the city on fire. That's based. You, in America, not even being able to afford your insulin, and then cheering the party that just voted to fuck you over again, to take more money from you so that rich people can pay even less in taxes, and so that corporations can take even more of the money they don't pay you and don't pay in taxes to buy stock buybacks, and all the people that told you to cheer Doge and cheer Trump for talking about cutting the military budget, when in actuality, they just want to shuffle some of the money around in the existing budget, and in this new budget, they want to give more money to the military-industrial complex. And you motherfuckers cheer it. It's actually embarrassing how many people in this country fully participate in the rich's class warfare against them. In the remainder of the video, she talks about tipping culture and how it goes back to slavery. And tipping culture in this country is so disgusting and has gotten so out of hand, and corporations like to use it for just ways to underpay their employees and basically offload the cost that they should be giving to their employees onto the taxpayer. And we could do a whole other video on how corporations and tech companies use these apps and use these independent contractors and tips in order to fuck over their workers and not pay a living wage. But it's true that it really does all go back to slavery. And this is the inevitable result of a country that chose to never pay reparations to the descendants of Black Americans. This is what happens. Eventually, it's going to come for you too. And now you're getting fucked over by these tipping laws, and you're getting fucked over by the corporations, and you're getting fucked over so bad by them that you're actually defending the people abusing you. And a lot of that goes back to you guys not wanting to deal with the reparations issue. In fact, apparently, you rather get screwed over by your own employer and throw other working class people, including yourself, under the bus than have to deal with that.
And murder is a very American problem-solving instinct. You know, we're almost 600 days into the demonic genocide in Gaza being perpetrated by Israel and by the United States. That's 50 months of wanton, inhuman carnage playing out on everyone's smartphones, on everyone's social media platforms. It's the most documented, the most visible, the most seen genocide in history. Israeli troops just shot at European diplomats just a day or so ago. There are daily massacres in Gaza. And Netanyahu has declared his explicit desire to completely wipe out the Palestinians in the most unequivocal language that any of us has heard since Hitler. And Donald Trump has signaled his absolute endorsement of ethnic cleansing. And at the same time, he's inventing allegations of ethnic cleansing against South Africa and pretending to be outraged about it. Look, you can't impose this kind of cognitive dissonance, this kind of hypocrisy, this kind of extreme moral and mental sadism on your population and not have some fuses short circuit, especially when your population is already habituated to violence and they're already disproportionately suffering from mental and psychological illnesses across the population, and they're already under enormous tension and pressure regarding their own economic situation. I mean, Americans are barely holding on to their sanity as it is. Your whole society seems like it's a social engineering project to see how much gaslighting, how much emotional abuse, and how much dysfunction human beings can be forced to take before they either implode or explode. You ban people from boycotting, you crack down on protests, you jail and deport protesters, you ignore international law, you dismiss the institutions of international law, while you're basically steering people towards violence. That whole government, the American government, the whole government is acting like those FBI agents who coax and conspire and entrap people in violent plots of their own making. You punish all peaceful means of protest, and then you escalate in the policies that are being protested. And like I said, you do nothing but teach violence to your people all day, every day, in your media, in your music, in your movies, in your games, and in your whole approach to the world. So how do you think that's going to turn out? You know? How are you going to be telling your own people that a genocidal war criminal is a brave man and give him standing ovations and give him billions upon billions of your people's money precisely to continue committing crimes against humanity and not expect them to learn the lesson that lawless violence is legitimate? Especially when you have blatantly showed them that diplomacy doesn't work, economic pressure doesn't work with you, public opinion doesn't work with you, the law doesn't work with you, no legal means, no diplomatic means, no economic means, no popular means, no peaceful means can ever dislodge your fangs from the people of Gaza. Well, I think you want to drive people into desperation, to do desperate acts, precisely so that you can crack down on them even more, so you can double down and act even worse than you've already been acting all this time. And then you're going to grandstand now about how outrageous the shooting was in Washington, D.C., as if you care about human life at all. I mean, never mind about the other 5 people who got shot in Washington, D.C. over just the last week or so. But those were just senseless killings, so that's fine. But this one had symbolism. This one can be exploited for political reasons. So now you care. Now your ideological mourning kicks in. Now the headlines can stretch across the continents. Now the hand-wringing can begin about the dangers of radicalization and hate speech and anti-Semitism and so forth. But let's be honest, this isn't grief, it's an opportunity. It's not outrage, it's leverage. The truth is, the American government doesn't even care about Americans being killed in America unless the narrative is suitable. I mean, how many mass shootings, how many school massacres, how many African Americans are killed by the police and nothing moves the needle? But you let one bullet fly in the direction of your imperial narrative and suddenly the whole machinery comes to life. Suddenly the think tanks are drafting policy briefs. Suddenly Congress is passing resolutions. Suddenly terrorism is back on the menu. And all of it, of course, pointing in one direction, to suppress dissent. So let's be real. This isn't about one shooting. This is about silencing 600 days of justified outrage and about criminalizing sympathy with the victims of genocide. It's about shutting down the voices that refuse to pretend that Israel is the victim. And yes, if it turns out that it was a false flag, and again, I'm not saying that it was, but if it was, it wouldn't be the first time, and it wouldn't be shocking. Because for a regime that is founded on myth and maintained by deception, staging another scene would just be par for the course. Because that's what you do. You know, that's what you do when your survival depends upon manufacturing moral capital from corpses. That's what you do when your legitimacy is completely bankrupt and the only currency you have left is fear. But whether this was orchestrated or not, one thing is clear, it was inevitable. Not because people are inherently violent, no, but because your entire system has systematically blocked every non-violent path. Because your entire society has been primed, or has been cultivated for cruelty. Because for 600 days, you have demanded that the world watch a live-streamed genocide and then cheer for the murderers. You've made empathy a crime. You've made protest illegal. You've made justice unreachable. And now you want to cry foul when your own citizens finally break under the weight of your lies. No. You don't get to play victim now. You don't get to cry terror when you're the ones who have institutionalized terror financially, militarily, psychologically, economically in every corner of this planet. You don't get to moralize about violence when you send hellfire missiles against tents. You don't get to quote Martin Luther King when you ban students from even saying Free Palestine. You don't get to invoke the sanctity of life when you funded the desecration of life for nearly 2 straight years with no remorse. If you want peace, then stop blocking the path to peace. If you want nonviolence, then stop criminalizing nonviolence. If you want to stop the spread of hate, then stop building your empire on hate. Because what you're seeing now in America, what you just saw in Washington, D.C., whether it was real or orchestrated, that's not the disease, that's the symptom. The disease is you, is your so-called civilization. And until you stop infecting the world with your moral rot, then you can't be shocked when that sickness comes home.
Today's Hitler says Free Palestine is today's Heil Hitler. Benjamin Netanyahu has wasted no time proclaiming that Free Palestine is just today's version of Heil Hitler following the shooting of 2 Israeli embassy staffers in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, seizing on this new opportunity to frame Israel's critics as dangerous Jew haters who must be shut down by any means necessary. Yeah, sure, Bibi. Right. Opposing today's Hitler is today's version of Heil Hitler. There's been a frenetic push from the pro-Israel crowd in using the slain embassy staffers to argue that pro-Palestine protesters need to be shut down, and it's just so ridiculous. Nobody should grant it even 1 second of serious consideration. There is nothing that could possibly happen that would convince me it's wrong to oppose an act of genocide.
This was a deal directly with the United States, not involving the Israelis. And, you know, if the goal of the United States is to, quote unquote, free all of the hostages from Gaza, and what you do is the first time you directly negotiate the release of a captive with Hamas, you then lie about it, or as Hamas said, throw the deal in the trash, that means then that the mediators are going to hear from Hamas, how can we trust anything? So, you know, I've asked Hamas, even if you make a deal that seems to be in line with your terms, that demilitarization is a red line, that, you know, surrender is not going to happen, that you're not going to allow Israel to remain an occupying force in Gaza, what's to stop Israel from just violating it again? Because Israel has a PhD in violating agreements that it signed. Israel is currently violating its agreements in Lebanon. Israel is bombing Syria. Israel repeatedly violated the ceasefire deal certified by Joe Biden and Donald Trump that was signed in January. And what Hamas is saying is, yes, all of that is true, but we have no other option. And so what they're saying is they want Trump personally to announce any deal that happens next, and they want Steve Witkoff to publicly shake hands with Khalil al-Hayya, the top negotiator from Hamas. You know, it's symbolic. This isn't the official position of Hamas. This is what some people involved with the negotiations have suggested as ways of trying to ensure some level of accountability. But everything is a gamble for the Palestinians when they're dealing with the Israelis, because the Israelis lie and they violate every agreement. So, you know, we have to
kill the negotiators.
And they kill all of the negotiators.
I mean, it was insane.
Abby, it's the most shameful period in the history of journalism. We've had well over 200 of our Palestinian colleagues murdered by Israel. And it's not just that there's been overwhelming silence from major news organizations and famous journalists. It's that they've refused to work with Palestinian journalists. They've refused to respect our colleagues for the risks that they're taking. They all like to go to fancy dinners and pat themselves on the back. And, you know, Jake Tapper from CNN was constantly tweeting, "Free Evan Gershkovich," the Wall Street Journal reporter who was being held in Russia. I also wanted Evan Gershkovich to be freed. You know, the difference between me and Jake Tapper is that I'm consistent in defending freedom of the press and the life of our colleagues, regardless of who they're reporting for or who tells me that these are the bad guys. These are our colleagues. And, you know, it's shameful. This is complicity in the murder of our journalistic colleagues. And let me tell you something about Hossam Shabbat. You know, he was a very young guy, and he was a correspondent for Al Jazeera Mubashir. And a lot of what he was doing was just going around to the most horrifying, dangerous places right after missiles had struck, right after ordnance had hit. And he was just recording and describing what he saw. It was classic in the field journalism. And he was doing this while struggling to survive a genocide himself. And like you, I watched him for so long, and another heroic journalist, Anas Al-Sharif, who also works for Al Jazeera. And eventually, when we started Dropsite, we got in touch with Hossam Shabat, and he had never written a print article before. So we didn't know what was going to happen. And he submitted his first piece to us. He would write in Arabic, and then Sharif Abdel Quddus, my colleague, would translate it. Abby, he was lyrical in how he wrote. This was somebody who, if he wasn't assassinated by Israel, would have been a famous writer. He wanted to be a writer. That's what he wanted to do. He was saying to us, I don't want to just be running around with my camera. I actually want to write. And he was a brilliant writer. He had raw talent. And, people know who he is because we've all seen his videos. But he was such an incredible human being and such a beautiful writer. And this is true of so many Palestinians that we've had the honor of publishing. Israel has mass murdered journalists and their families and their family members. And they also have put out hit lists of Palestinian journalists that they accused Hossam Shabat of being a sniper in the Beit Hanun battalion of the Qassam brigades. You know how sick it was? I actually pushed Hamas on this because Hossam worked for us. I knew it was a lie, but I pushed Hamas on it, and they actually did an audit, the Qassam brigades. It's an entirely false assertion. They said on the record to me that the documents Israel produced are fabricated documents. And that's what they do to Palestinians. Hassan Aslaya, one of the most famous, every single Palestinian knows who he is. He should have been known all throughout the Western media world. He was one of the most remarkable journalists, and they tried to assassinate him on April 7th, and then eventually, a few weeks later, they did assassinate him in a hospital, in a burn unit, where he had 2 fingers amputated and was receiving treatment. And then they put out a statement saying they take out a Hamas terrorist.
He told us it would happen, Jeremy.
And he told us it would happen.
He said, they are going to come for me even in this hospital bed. What can I do?
Because Palestinians know, but they know what Israel's agenda is toward them, and we owe a debt to Palestinian journalists that the world will never ever be able to repay. You know how Hossam was killed? He had stopped to interview. He was in the north of Gaza. He had stopped to interview people who were displaced persons, and there was a small-scale Israeli drone that was hovering and following him, and he would say that they would be following him all the time, and he gets out to go and interview forcibly displaced people, and at the moment he goes to start the interview, they drop the munition that exploded on him, and it severed his body in half. That's how Hossam Shabat was assassinated by Israel, and he was assassinated for the crime of journalism and exposing war crimes around the clock nonstop. When you think that it's okay to just go along with your daily life because it's someone else's problem, what you get is a terrorist like Benjamin Netanyahu serving as the arsonist in chief, not just burning fires throughout the Middle East, but altering the state of the world today. And if we as a people, whether we're journalists or activists or scholars, if we don't pour our hearts into confronting this right now, what comes next will be even worse. We always think we've seen the worst, but we haven't. And Netanyahu used a phrase recently that I found so eerie. He said that we're going to unleash things you haven't seen yet against people in Gaza as part of Operation Gideon's Chariot. And I think that, we can't let the United States off the hook. I see as a turning point also, when Barack Obama was president, Mr. Constitutional Law Scholar, Obama normalized and for many liberals legitimized the notion that assassination is a central and necessary part of running the empire. And he said that he found a smarter way to wage wars with his drone wars. And he said, we need to look forward, not backward, in terms of holding CIA torturers accountable. When someone like Obama is in power and what they do is legitimize the agenda of people like Dick Cheney, then you get Benjamin Netanyahu's genocidal war in Gaza. We have to be better students of history. We have to be better analysts of what is actually happening in real time. And this is part of why it's so important to pay close attention to the Palestinian journalists on the ground. They are writing the first draft of history to keep it away from the so-called victors, to keep it away from those in power who are setting the agenda. That's a central part of why we must be supporting them.
All right, kids. At around 2:10 p.m. this past Thursday, emergency calls went to the Iberville Sheriff's Department in Louisiana about a reported fire taking place at Nottoway Resort, what was the largest antebellum mansion in the South. Reportedly, 10 fire departments from areas surrounding the town of White Castle worked together to contain the fire and protect nearby buildings in what one official called the biggest fire he'd seen in his entire 20-year career. As of this recording, fire officials believe the cause of the Nottoway plantation blaze was electrical and not suspicious, which may have started in a side bedroom. There had been a tour of the property that morning, but no reported injuries.
There's more than one way to be racist, and not just explicitly. For too long, Americans have remained nostalgic about colonial structures without being confronted with the realities of them. From HGTV to DIY renovations of historic homes, colonial architecture has been viewed as a beautiful reminder of the country's beginnings, rather than the shameful torture chambers the walls once enclosed on stolen land. From settler cottage horror to Spanish colonial revival, Americans have been scrambling to preserve the last bits of their supremacist heritage that is still seen as socially acceptable. So when the rest of us are anything other than sad about a fire reducing a plantation to the ash it deserves to be, amen, the pearl clutching begins. Rather than having an honest conversation about the historical nature of how these buildings came to exist and represent, we are subjected to the lectures on the significance of our names. Maybe, rather than being disappointed that your wedding venue is not available for your entertainment anymore, it might be wise to understand the psychopathy behind the logic that makes you think you can have fun on the bones of the enslaved.
So many, for so long, have tried to reason with those who aren't aware of or don't want to acknowledge that the Confederacy was and is a foreign country that attacked these United States for the purpose of maintaining the peculiar institution of slavery. And allowing them to set up monuments to white supremacy was and is siding with the traitors, who should have been hung and, yes, had their brand and their belongings burned to the ground by Union soldiers.
Hey, Orville, man, you're going to have to call pest control.
Why?
I just came in through the backyard and I threw something in the dumpster and a gang of mice just came out.
I'm sorry, what?
I saw a gang of mice just run out of his dumpster.
No, you don't mean mice. You mean mice.
No, nigga, it was more than one. It was mice. It's more than one mouse.
Nah, dude. You saying it wrong.
Exactly, tell me.
It's not mice. It's mouses.
Jarmel, what the fuck are you talking about, bro?
If it's one, that's a mouse. If it's two, that's mouses. 3 mouses, 4 mouses. That's a gang of mouses. Not mices, mouses.
Both of you young men are stupid, all right? Orville, tell these niggas what it is, man. Let's say you at the park, right?
Yeah, all right.
You see a lake with a goose swimming in the lake.
Or ocean.
Damn. Ain't no gooses don't swim in the ocean, goofy.
Yes, there is. The one with the long ass nose, and they be diving into the ocean grabbing the fish and shit.
That's not a goose. That's a pterodactyl. Anyways, Orville, you at the park, right?
What park they at?
What?
What park is the goose swimming in the lake at?
That don't matter, man. That's not even part of the question, man. All right, the question is, if you see a goose swimming in the lake, right, at the park.
Is it gonna be some hoes there?
Shit.
Cause you know me. I gotta look fly for the lake.
Orville, bring it back to the goose, man. I'm talking about the park, no matter what park it is. All right? It's a park with a lake in it. And you see a goose in the lake swimming by itself. That's just one goose, homie. All right? Then you see another goose chilling, swimming over to the other goose. Then you got a goose and another goose. Now they swimming together, right? What you call that? What is them?
2 gooses.
Damn.
Exactly. Mouses, gooses.
First, all right, so all 3 of y'all stupid. It's not mouses and it's not gooses, all right? It's geeses. One goose, 2 geeses.
No, please stop. No, it's not mices,
It's not mousesises. It's not gooseses. It's not geeseses. It's none of them. There is no issises on it, okay? It's already plural when you say it, okay? When you say mice, it's already plural. 1, 2, 3, 4, however many, it's plural. If it's one, it's mouse. If it's a goose, it's one. If it's more than that, it's called geese. It doesn't matter how many. It doesn't put no issises on it. Please understand this, okay? We're friends. You cannot be dumb as hell like this with me. And it's not a pterodactyl, asshole, okay? It was a pelican he was talking about. A pterodactyl is a dinosaur. It's not even a bird. What is wrong with you? Come on, please understand. Know this, move on, apply it, comprehend it, gather it. Put it together. You get what I'm saying, okay? Don't say this again around nobody else. It's important that y'all get that, okay?
Shut the fuck up. Left with me, man. We didn't even get to the crib. I knocked her back in the car.
Your big ass is having sex with women in cars. Hey, I just hope you wrapped up, man. You can't just be smashing random chicks at the club. You gotta protect yourself. You protect yourself, right?
Nah, no more. I'm straight on the whole wrapping up because I'm vaccinated now, so I don't have to wrap up no more. As a matter of fact, y'all all should get vaccinated. You feel me? Y'all
don't have to use condoms.
Nah, not if you vaccinated, man. So I'm surprised y'all not vaccinated yet, bro.
Hold on. Wait, no. I got a question first before you ask your question. Can you just say what you just said one more time?
What? I was in the Mitsubishi smash.
No, not that part. Fast forward. You said you don't have to. What?
I don't have to wear condoms no more. I can have. It's not even unprotected sex. It's still protected because I'm protected under the vaccination. I'm vaxxed.
All right, now it's my question. Hold on. So, because you got vaccinated,
It prevents you from catching STDs and all that.
I'm getting vaccinated.
That's what I'm saying, man. Everybody should be vaxxed, bro. Be responsible, my nigga. That was therefore you safe from everything else.
I don't understand. You say be responsible.
Right.
That's a very important word. And being responsible, you need to do your research. Where did you find that the vaccination for coronavirus protects you from STDs? Where have you read this at?
This nigga, man. Let's just do this, bro. We all know in the last year and a half, coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it, been the biggest killer of the world, man. Everybody been dying off this thing, right? So now we got a vaccination for the coronavirus. It's the biggest killer. It's big as everything. So why would I be able to catch AIDS, STDs, chlamydia, and all that other stuff if I'm already vaccinated with the biggest killer? If I'm immune from the biggest killer, I'm immune from everything under that too. Like AIDS is it's like an old throwback disease now. You know what I'm saying? So you can't even really.
Serious?
Yeah, bro, when the last time you seen somebody die of AIDS?
I got this. Look, you can't catch a disease weaker than one you've already had. When is the last time you've seen Magic Johnson cough?
Man, you smart, bro. I don't know how you think of that.
He's not smart.
I am smart, bro. Okay? Check this out. Case in point. How many of us got chickenpox back in the day? Do you have chickenpox back in the day?
Yes, but I'm not raising my hand because you're going to make a stupid point, but go ahead.
You had chickenpox. You had it when you was 9. I had mine when I was 8. How old was you when you had yours?
16.
Exactly. You?
7.
Exactly, man. We had it real young. You feel me? We ain't had it again since because you can't catch it again. And for me, I wanted to be super safe, so I got vaccinated. So I don't have to worry about catching that or nothing else ever again.
What about lactose intolerance? You know I be getting gassy off the cheese, man.
Get vaccinated, bro. No more bubble guts.
Oh, I'm about to give me a milkshake fresh off vaccination. Oh! Let's go!
Okay. Listen. You pay too much money for them glasses to see things this way, okay? If you think a vaccination is gonna stop you from being lactose, you're gonna be shitting on yourself for days.
Damn.
Trust me, I need you to keep your condoms. Don't you listen to what he gotta say. Don't you bring no dumbass babies in this world. You wear 2 condoms when you do something, okay? And your big ass having unprotected sex in that little monster, thinking that a vaccination gonna stop you from getting an STD. The coronavirus vaccination is simply for what it says. The COVID-19 vaccination. The title in front of it is what it's concerning. That is all it's there for. COVID-19, it cannot protect you from AIDS. It cannot protect you from any other disease. Not chickenpox.
I must retort, man. Chickenpox is an outjury, not an injury. You can't mutate from an outjury to an injury. It's physically impossible.
What the hell is an algery? What are you talking about,
This,
bro?
you see this scar? That's an algery. Algery. These are outside the body things that hurt you.
Why y'all pointing to? First
Because
of all, algery is no. Stop talking to me, bro. Algery is not a word, okay? You just made that up.
It's the opposite.
Are you not?
Injury.
It's
algery.
Where you?
When you sick inside, you got.
Stop talking to me, bro. Stop talking to me. No, it's not.
I got a few algery.
Remember? No. Ah, y'all. Listen, I don't understand. Y'all, something's wrong. Okay. Listen, I'm gonna tell you like this. COVID-19 vaccination is simply for COVID. It is there to not allow you to get COVID severely. You're not even immune to get, you can still get COVID with the vaccination. I hope you know that. And it does not protect you from any other disease, okay? So you need to strap up and stop randomly hitting chicks in a monster. Your big ass needs to get a bigger car too, okay? Algery is not a word, okay? Don't say it no more, all right? You need to lose those glasses because they're not helping. They're not making you smarter, okay? Y'all stop. Stop playing with me. Stop joking, okay?
What about sleep apnea? She get mad at the shit I'm saying because she know I'm always right. She gonna get in the car and smash off, and then they ran both my foots over.
Both foots, my nigga?
Both of them, man.
Hey, y'all saying it wrong. It ain't foot.
Thank you.
It's feet.
Feet.
When you got your socks on, it's foot. When your toes is out, raw and shit, it's feet.
That don't even make sense. Where the E's come in?
What?
No, I ain't, I'm doing something, so I'm very crazy.
Look like you got something to say.
Hey, I'm gonna let this cup pass for me. I'm ready.
I don't even want to get into it. It's all good. Say what you feel. It's all good.
Nah, say something.
What you think? There's nothing on my mind. I am focused over it. Thank you. Continue with your conversation, though, please.
You must not even know then.
Is it foots or feet, my nigga?
Do you really want me to share with
Yeah.
you? It's neither. It's not foots. It's not feets. Foot is singular. If you want to make it plural, it's feet. Multiple feet.
How is it plural with no S at the end of feet?
It doesn't need to be an S on it.
It's 2 foots, my nigga. The right foot and the left foot. 2 foots with the S.
Exactly. Foots.
Didn't you play college ball? Yeah, man. What that got to do with anything?
What? Stop! Stop! Nigga, I'm tired of you. You always try to correct somebody.
You all asked me to say something. I didn't even want to be in this conversation. I was in my phone.
Nah. One day you gonna correct the wrong nigga, and they gonna knock your tooth out.
Yep, all of them.
They're gonna knock my what out?
Your tooth.
I'm sorry. They're gonna knock my what?
Your tooth.
I'm sure they're not going to knock my tooths out. It's teeth. Teeth.
Where the E's come from in this motherfucker, man?
Haven't you heard teeth before, yes?
Yeah, nigga, but that's for them niggas that don't be knowing how to talk.
Yeah.
So how do you know when to put an S behind a word to make it plural and when not to?
I don't know why, because I do not create the English language.
Oh, you don't know that?
I don't know how I know. I just know. Because this is the English language and I was taught this in school.
So you saying it's no S on feet, but it's plural. So when do you put an S on the word to make it plural and when do you not? Like for example, mouth. If I have one mouth, that's mouth, right? But let's just say I had 2 mouths. Why you don't call it meath?
Okay. Have you heard of meath before?
How is tooth teeth and mouth not meath? So mouth singular is mouth, but mouth plural is mouths. But you saying foot can't be foots. This thing ain't making no sense, man.
This nigga just added
Come on, man.
Okay, we added the S.
You know what? You're right.
I'm what?
I'm wrong this time. You're right.
We what?
You're right as well. You're right as well. I'm sorry. You're right. It's foots and feets actually. And all of that. You're right.
We got one. Hey.
I'm tripping, bro. My bad. It's 2.
I told you. Sometimes, hey man, sometimes it feels good to teach you something too, man.
I was glad to be here to learn that, bro.
That's what we here for, man. What we here for, you know what I'm saying? I teach you something, you teach me something, nigga. That's how friendship work, right? Cause I'm smart too, my nigga. We smart.
I know some shit. Right, you are.
Damn, it feels good to be a smart nigga too. Baby, you're nice.
What's up?
Where my cup at?
In the kitchen.
Why is it in the kitchen and not in my hand?
Cause you didn't go get it yet. They're the guests, so.
They're the guest, and I'm the man of the house. So.
Okay, so you can be the man of this house and then go to the man kitchen, go get your drink, and then come back to the man couch.
See, it's the funky ass attitude for me.
Oh, well, see, it's the audacity for me.
The audacity. The reason why he rubbing her legs is probably because he's nice to her, and she in pocket all the time. You always out of pocket.
Well, he's probably always in her pockets because he's affectionate. It's the lack of affection for me.
Lack of affection? What you talking about? Speaking of affection, I wish you would come to bed with some sexy panties on or off. Instead, it's the thick ass sweats for me.
I know you're not talking with them old ass drawers. It's the hole in the drawers for me.
They're not old, they vintage. I had them in college, they my lucky draws.
So what, you just lucky Monday through Sunday?
Shit. Oh, so we just talking about all kinds of things that's irritating, huh?
Hey, yo, Theo, y'all good?
Yeah, what you mean?
Just, you know what I mean, just making sure y'all good.
Oh, no, we straight, man. You know what I'm saying? Me and my lovely, you feel me?
For sure. That's what's up.
I'm surprised you even see what I got on. Sitting up there eating all them snacks. It's the crumbs in the bed for me.
Crumbs in the bed. It's a fart in your sleep for me.
I don't even poop.
I didn't say nothing about pooping. I said farting. Poop just like a, excuse me. That ain't you. You be knocking my nose back.
That is not what be knocking your nose back. It's the snoring for me.
First of all, you be saying I like my big teddy bear in bed. You like my snoring. What are you talking about?
No, I did the whole teddy thing in the beginning because it was cute. And now that the teddy here, I got the whole cabin shaking. I don't like that.
Well, it's a hair in the drain for me.
Ha! I feel you on the hair in the drain.
Wait, what?
Oh, no, it's just, you know, sometimes I gotta clean it up. But yeah, it's all good, though.
But you got more hair on your body than I do. Why you just assume it's my hair?
Okay. Honolulu, baby.
Honolulu.
Honolulu, baby.
Well, it's the one to watch the football all day long for me. I want to sit up there and watch the pregame, the game, the halftime game, the after the show commentary, all the highlights. Can't nobody sit up there and watch that much football in one round.
That part.
See.
That part? Baby, you watch football with me. I thought you enjoyed it.
If I'm being honest, I really don't. It's boring to me. It's the same teams doing the same thing every single time. Like, why do you have to reenact every single thing you do? Every single time you're out there, you got the X's and the O's and the heinies and
Just like the home cooking shows we be watching. It's the same thing, the same ingredients. And yeah, them boring.
Yeah, but you benefit from me watching those cooking shows. I don't benefit from you watching foosball.
Because I mean, the cooking it's cool.
Speaking of food, it's the dry ass meatloaf for me.
First of all, you like my meatloaf.
No, I eat your meatloaf.
And you like it. Because it's good.
It's the delusions of grandeur for me.
Your mama.
Oh, speaking of mamas, it's the nosy ass mama for me.
Well, it's your slow ass grandma for me.
That's Nana. Don't talk about Nana. Don't do that, Nana.
Don't say nothing to my mama neither.
My Nana ain't slow when she making us that pie.
Apple or sweet potato?
Sweet potato.
Ooh, I make a mean sweet potato pie, don't I, baby?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. Pumpkin pie-ish, but
dang,
I eat it.
Pumpkin pie-ish? Nigga, I'll punch you in your beard right now. What? Pumpkin pie? How could you say some shit like that, bro?
Bro, you gonna bro me?
Yeah. You know what? Get home the best way you know how, bro. Bro.
Joke number one. For joke number one, I took my beautiful wife to Hawaii for Christmas. Yeah, spent way too much money on this bitch, but you know what I mean? It's all good. It was a good time. Good time. I love my wife, but she does do one thing I find bothersome. She will freak out when we meet celebrities. Bro, we met Ed Sheeran right in front of him. Oh my God! I was like, bitch, he's a leprechaun. Chill out. You know what I'm saying? Relax. Relax. I pulled her to the side and said, hey, you gotta stop doing that. It's embarrassing. You're embarrassing me. We meet celebrities now. Be cool, dog. And she got very upset. She didn't like that. Derek, that's not fair. Derek, that's not fair. You would freak out if you met Rihanna. I know you would. You would so freak out if you met Rihanna. I was like, no, I wouldn't. I would play it cool. Because I'm trying to fuck. I want to have sex with her, you idiot. Yeah, I'm not going to freak out and ruin my chances. That'd be dumb. Joke number 2. Ooh, for joke number 2, I not 100%, but I'm pretty sure I figured out a way to end racism. I'm walking down a street, right? I'm walking. And I see a white person walking towards me. And they notice me. And they cross the street. I cross the street with their ass. I cross with them. Don't break eye contact. Keep smiling, all right? Keep the teeth out. And then when I get right up on them, this is the most important part. When I get super duper close, I beat the shit out of them. That's me. I fuck him up, you know what I mean? I do it for him. I don't do it for me. I do it for him. I do it for the white man. I do it so when he walks away, he doesn't feel like a racist. Joke number 3. Ooh, for joke number 3, I fly a lot. Comes with the job. But recently, for the first time, I was randomly selected by TSA. Couldn't believe it. Me, Derek Poston, a terrorist. My best friend in the world, he's a Muslim dude. His name's Hassan Ahmad. I fly everywhere with him. We go everywhere together. He gets randomly selected every airport. Every single time. Clockwork, every single time. Honestly, though, I think it keeps happening because I asked for it. I don't trust this nigga that much. No, stop being racist. No. It's because of what he looks like. He's Muslim, you know what I mean? He's Muslim as fuck. He's got the big ass beard, you know what I'm saying? He ain't got nothing behind his eyes, you know what I'm talking about? This nigga. So, I'm with my boy, and we're in line, and they said it to me. They said, sir, you've been randomly selected for additional screening. And I was like, what are you talking about, bro? What you talking about, me? What terrorist walking up to you at 6 in the morning like this, dog? So, flirting, you know what I mean? Licking his lips, smiling. What terrorist has dimples, my nigga? You know what I'm saying? Who's this cutie pie? This how I dress, y'all. 24/7. This the outfit. I'm a cartoon character, bro. This is my Steve Jobs, you know what I'm saying? You think a terrorist did all this? You think a terrorist matched the snapback to the black tee, to the jacket, to the Jordan 1s for the mission. For the mission. Bro, you think a terrorist was looking in the mirror that morning like, I'm about to kill these niggas twice today, dog. Damn. Osama, I gotta change. I can't blow up this fit, bro. Hold up. Boss, I look good. Joke number 4. For joke number 4, there's a song stuck on my playlist. Can't stop listening to it. Whitney Houston. I just want to dance with somebody. Slaps. Played it every wedding. But if you listen to that song all the time, on repeat, that's a sad fucking song, though. I just want to dance with anybody, really. Are y'all hearing her? I just want to feel the heat of another motherfucker. That woman said, I just want to dance with somebody who loves me. The reason that's not a sad song to us is because Whitney Houston is a bad bitch. She fine as hell, dog. So it's not a sad song at all. My nigga, that's a whole different song if Lizzo sings that song. Then it's Don't nobody want to dance with this bitch? That's crazy, dog. Don't nobody want to feel the heat. Don't nobody want to feel the heat. She has so much heat to give. Joke number 5. Joke number 5. I've been with my wife for 10 years. Love my wife. We don't really fight. We've only ever gotten into one big one. And that was the proposal. Boys, I planned that proposal out months in advance. I rented a house and a car, the flowers, the production. 2 days before I proposed, she went fucking crazy on me. She ain't never done that. We don't fight, bro, but 48 hours before I gave this bitch my life, she was like, Derek, you motherfucker, are you gonna marry me or not? What kind of bitch you think I am? Got me waiting around. Grow up. I remember that one. Grow up. Make a decision. You gonna marry me or not? What you gonna do? What you gonna do? I couldn't believe it. Bro, I made that bitch wait 2 more months. Boy, who the fuck you talking to? I love it more than anything. But you think I'm playing? I walked around 2 months, ring in my pocket like I'm Frodo Baggins, my nigga, you know what I mean? Say something else, call him, I'll chuck it in the mountain, dog. Ruin it for everybody. Joke number 6. My wife's a silly lady. She's funny. She wanted to see Wicked. I took her to Wicked. Opening day. She wanted to see it the first day it came out. I remember it was gay as fuck. I thoroughly enjoyed it. No one mourns the Wicked dude. I love it. But we're leaving the theater. And we had to cut down a dark alley. Dark as shit. When we cut down this alley, I felt my wife. She grabbed me tight. And I looked at her. She was just like this. She was like, I love you. I said, what the fuck is it? She said, oh, Derek, you just make me feel so safe. I feel so safe with you. And I said, oh. Well, bitch, I don't feel safe. We're in an alley. Tighten the fuck up, dog. I told my wife, tighten up, bro. We in the alley. What you talking about? Only way I would feel safe in this situation is after you grab me, I can grab a bigger nigga next to me. You know what I'm saying? Well, I'm glad you're here, Lizzo. Girl, I feel safe about you. All right, that's my time. Thank y'all.
There is no Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is a brutal Israeli occupation which must come to its end one way or the other. The day that the Israelis will realize and recognize that the Palestinians have exactly the same rights as they, but exactly until the last inch, this will be the day that things will be solved. And then I want to hear from Israel, what is the answer of Israel? Why not equal rights? Because we are the chosen people? Because God promised us something? Because we are better? Because we deserve more? Two peoples share one piece of land there. One people has all the rights in the world, the other people has no rights whatsoever. It looks like apartheid, it talks like apartheid, it is apartheid.
The Biden administration justified it by saying that the United States had a responsibility to protect Ukraine from Russian invasion. But that's deceptive at best. The aid to Ukraine wasn't aid. It was weapons. They were weapon shipments that the US sent to Ukraine to fight a proxy war against Russia that it's been waging for decades. During the Cold War, the United States and Russia, then the Soviet Union, were engaged in a worldwide struggle between their dueling systems, capitalism and communism. In order to contain the Soviet Union, the US, along with its Western European allies, formed a military alliance called NATO, with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. According to Article 5 of NATO's treaty, any attack on a NATO country would trigger a response from all of NATO. Now, since NATO was an anti-Soviet alliance, you might be thinking that there would be no need for NATO after the Cold War. But it was continued, because the US found itself as the sole superpower left in the world after the Cold War, and decided that it was going to maintain its superpower status by destroying any power that might rise to challenge it. One of those powers ended up being Russia. Despite repeated promises from the US that NATO wouldn't expand, in their own words, 1 inch eastwards, NATO expanded into several Eastern European countries, further tightening the noose around Russia that it created during the Cold War. NATO expansion created obvious security concerns for Russia. NATO countries play host to massive military bases and advanced US weapons that would now be right on Russia's doorstep. Furthermore, NATO countries practice huge joint military exercises where they simulate full-blown ground invasions, which could only be interpreted as practice runs for invading Russia. And if Russia objected or had a dispute with any of its neighbors, it would trigger a direct conflict between Russia and all of NATO. On the issue of NATO expansion, Ukraine was Russia's red line. Ukraine has a large economy and shares a massive border with Russia. Despite this, the US spent decades meddling in Ukrainian politics to put pro-NATO politicians in power. In 2004, the US spent tens of millions of dollars sponsoring a pro-EU, pro-Western candidate in the Ukrainian presidential election, who was not only a friend of George W. Bush, but whose wife was actually a former employee at the US State Department. The US flooded money into the US Agency for International Development's democracy program in Ukraine, which is essentially a euphemism for supporting political factions that hold pro-US views. Even though the US-backed candidate, Viktor Yushchenko, lost the initial election, pro-Western forces were able to cast doubt on the election results and force a new election, which Yushchenko won. In 2014, the US employed the same playbook, openly funding Ukrainian protest groups who opposed the Ukrainian president at the time, Viktor Yanukovych. Even though Yanukovych just wanted Ukraine to maintain a neutral position between the EU and Russia, US politicians try to frame this as Yanukovych being a Russian stooge. Ukrainian Nazi groups like Right Sector, C-14, and Svoboda spearheaded the coup, ran Yanukovych out of the presidential palace, and appointed themselves to key government positions in the new regime. Since the 2014 coup, Western leaders repeatedly flirted with the idea of admitting Ukraine to NATO, which was ultimately the reason Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Listening to the US corporate media, you'd think Putin just woke up one day and decided he wanted to invade another country because he's that evil. What you'll never hear is that for 30 years, the United States and NATO repeatedly violated their agreements, encircled Russia with weapons and military bases, and overthrew governments in its neighboring countries. The Russian invasion gave the West exactly what it was looking for, an excuse to start a direct armed conflict with Russia. And the best part for the West was that Ukrainians, not US or NATO troops, would be the ones doing all the fighting. This is why we say the aid the US sent wasn't aid. They were paying Ukrainians to be cannon fodder in their dirty war.
Iran is a signatory to the additional protocol. It's a signatory to the safeguards agreement. It is compliant with every aspect of international law with regard to its nuclear program. What is Israel? None of those. Zero. Israel won't even admit it has a nuclear weapon, let alone become a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Safeguards Agreement or the Additional Protocol or anything else. Israel's the danger, not Iran.
This issue with Pete Hegseth in the Signal chat, the big part that people missed was what was said in those chats. They were admitting that they were willing to take out an entire building of people to get one guy.
This is Lutheran Rail.
These days will end. The way they laugh, the way they push through a crowd. The sound of that voice telling you to stop, to go, to move, to die. Most people look away. We can't be like that. Life shows us what we stand to lose. The Empire has been
Proud the tractor beam.
choking us so slowly we're starting not to notice. The time has come to force their hand.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm. All this lies we've laid, all this information. We're drowning. Kindness, kinship.
Am I your daughter now?
When it's useful. Love.
We're worth more to him separately than together.
You need to accept what you're leaving behind. I'm Luther now, you're Clea. Everything else is up for grabs. I need to know you're making a choice.
Make it stop!
I lived most of my life
Make it stop!
without ever realizing that that was a possibility.
Never ends, does it? All the hiding.
It will. We'll bring them down or die trying. What else is there? I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
Luthen cares about results.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
How nice for you. I share my dreams with ghosts.
30 men.
Plus Krieger.
Doesn't matter to you, does it?
I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight.
His secrecy, his inability to collaborate. You have people everywhere, don't you? The web of doubts that he created.
I have friends everywhere. To set me on a path from which there's no escape.
Let's call it war.
I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost. And by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
You disgust me. You're finished.
And you're too late. The rebellion isn't here anymore. It can't hide forever. It's flown away. It's everywhere now. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting to disgust you. The ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude.
It's insulting to hear him run down by people who have given a fraction of his sacrifice to this rebellion.
So what do I sacrifice?
Luthen died for this.
Everything!
Just keep spreading, doesn't it?
There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere. And even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority. And then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this.